In the last couple of years, I made a lot of videos about the Legend of Zelda series, but there's a particular stretch of games that I think is the golden era of Zelda, from Ocarina of Time all the way to Wind Waker. And with the Oracle games and Majora's Mask in between, Zelda entered this brilliant and unforgettable period that shaped the series forever, at least for me. This is a compilation of those videos. Whether it's your first time or you've seen some of these before, I do hope you enjoy this journey through what I believe is the true heart of the franchise. Ocarina of Time was a major shift for the Zelda franchise, building on the gameplay and storytelling aspects of A Link to the Past. But this game also followed in Link's Awakening's footsteps, further setting the foundation for a world filled with colorful, interesting, and sometimes suspicious characters. And I know you all heard this spiel 100 times on other channels, but we're going to do it over here too. With all of those building blocks and a brand new set of hardware capable of dishing out 3D graphics, Nintendo had all the tools to create a legendary title that would set the precedent for the series. And once again, we turn our eyes to the hero, Link. A brand new incarnation of the character that would wreck the Zelda timeline for years to come. So let's head back into Hyrule and shed some light on the Nintendo 64 era of Zelda games as we continue to explore the origins of Link. I'm TheMentok and welcome to my Origin Oracle series. Grab a snack, kick back, and let's head back in time. So this version of Link would eventually be known as the Hero of Time. And according to the current Zelda timeline, this would be the earliest game in the series chronologically at the time of the release of this game. So we'll go through the plot of this one as it'll make it easier to explain its influence on future titles as well. We start off in Kokiri Forest in eastern Hyrule, home of the guardian spirit, the Great Deku Tree, Kokiri tribe, and our hero for this story, a young boy named Link. Every member of the Kokiri tribe has a fairy, but the narration at the beginning make sure to let us know that Link ain't got no fairies.
Sensational.
But the guardian of the forest, the Great Deku Tree, one day sends a fairy named Navi to summon Link. So it's revealed to us that some random evil person cursed the Deku Tree at some point. And as a test of Link's courage, the tree sends him inside of him to attempt to put an end to this curse. Without hesitation, Link does just that and enters his very first dungeon for the game. But even after destroying Goma, a demonic spider that was within the tree, it's too late. The Great Deku Tree would soon succumb to the curse, but as his spirit fades, he gives Link the spiritual stone of the forest and directs him to head to Hyrule to meet with Princess Zelda. So, with the Great Deku Tree dead and the Kokiri people upset with Link for letting that happen for some reason, the time has come for Link to finally leave Kokiri Forest. With a tough goodbye to his longtime friend Saria, she gives Link an ocarina, and he heads out on his journey. That name, Saria, where have I heard it before? So once Link leaves the forest, this is the moment he steps into Hyrule Field. And for my viewers that played this game when it first came out, how did this make you feel? Well, I hated it because it always got dark before I got to Hyrule, and then the skeletons came out and started attacking me, and then the drawbridge into the castle town was always up, so I didn't know how to escape, and yeah. I got with the program later, but this is my first memory of Hyrule Field. This thing is called a stall child, by the way. Maybe I'll make a video about Zelda enemies at some point like I did with Mario. After a few tribulations and a tedious stealth sequence within Hyrule Castle, Link has his destined meeting with Princess Zelda, who's being a little peeping Tina inside the castle courtyard. Also, if you slingshot the window, one of the castle guards will throw a whole bomb at you in response. Jesus, this is just a kid, man. Anyway, Zelda is excited to meet Link and shares the vision she's been having in her dreams about Link's arrival, as well as this completely not evil man named Ganondorf. She tells Link the story of the Triforce and how it was created by 3 goddesses. And the goddesses hid this artifact away in Hyrule, and anyone who gets their hands on it will be granted a wish. Most of this is the same lore established within A Link to the Past, so this is a nice callback. But the Triforce is now being housed within the Sacred Realm, a place that can be accessed within Hyrule's Temple of Time. To gain access to the Sacred Realm, one would need 3 spiritual stones and the Ocarina of Time. Well, Link already has one of these stones, so we're off to a great start. Finally, Zelda explains why she's been peeping through this conveniently placed window. Ganondorf is the leader of the all-female tribe called the Gerudo. Only a single male is born into this tribe every 100 years, and by law, they must become king. Now that I think about it, I'm surprised we've never seen another male Gerudo in the entire Zelda franchise up to this point. But anyway, Ganon is king of the Gerudos, and at this point of the story, has been rubbing elbows with the king of Hyrule. But Zelda sees through his nonsense and is aware of his plans to claim the Triforce for himself, so he can plunge Hyrule Hyrule into darkness. So she tasked Link with finding all of the spiritual stones first to gain access to the Triforce first. Easy. So Link must go to both Death Mountain and Zora's domain for the other two stones, helping out the Gorons and Zoras with their local problems caused by Ganondorf behind the scenes. Link will meet both Darunia, leader of the Gorons, and Princess Ruto of the Zoras during this segment of the game. Why do those names sound familiar? Link also stops by the Lon Lon Ranch somewhere along the way, where he meets the owner Talon and his daughter Malon. I mention them because they are direct references to Tarin and Marin from Link's Awakening. Toru Osawa, one of the scriptwriters, confirmed in an interview that these two were put in the game for people who played Link's Awakening to immediately recognize them. And it worked for me because I was quite excited as a kid to see them return in some form. This is also the same ranch where you'll meet Epona for the first time, and where you'll get to collect her later on in the game. Alright, so Link returns to Hyrule Castle to report to Princess Zelda, but his efforts are for naught. Ganon has already begun his attack, gunning for the Ocarina of Time. Unfortunately, Zelda must escape with her attendant Impa, tossing the Ocarina of Time into a nearby moat for Link to retrieve. Ganondorf, on the other hand, is in hot pursuit, but takes a minute to quickly baby shake Link before going about his way. But Link must finish his mission, so he hurries to the Temple of Time and presents the spiritual stones while playing the Song of Time on his newly acquired Ocarina of Time to open the sealed Door of Time.
Alright, I get it!
So locked away behind this door is the Master Sword, which Link draws from its pedestal, but instead of gaining access to the Triforce, the sword seals him away in the Sacred Realm for 7 years until he's worthy of wielding it, allowing Ganondorf to access the Sacred Realm and the Triforce along with it. Link awakens 7 years later as an adult, greeted by a man named Rauru. Wait, that name sounds—
I get it!
Okay, I'll stop. All of these names were pulled from the villages of Hyrule in Zelda 2, so I thought that was a pretty cool reference. But Rauru goes on to explain that he's one of the sages that look after the Sacred Realm, and the only one who can pull the Master Sword from its pedestal is the Hero of Time. When Link pulled it, he was way too young, but the Master Sword saw his potential and decided to seal him away for 7 years. But in the meantime, Ganon made his wish and transformed Hyrule into a shit show. So Link must journey forth and find all the other sages so that they can fight back against Ganon. The player emerges from the Temple of Time to see Hyrule is a complete wasteland filled with these things. Ugh. You know, I've never questioned why Link couldn't just access the Triforce as a child. Wouldn't that have saved the world before Ganon had any chance to do something? Did the Master Sword mess things up? I'm pretty sure he has to grab the sword to access the Sacred Realm. But if he opened the way to the realm, is it just open for anyone to step through when someone pulls the Master Sword from the pedestal? If that's the case, why not have a guard posted here to follow Link to the Triforce just in case anything happens? While there may or may not be answers to these questions, I'm not going to think too hard about this. But before we see how this tale ends, I gotta talk about Nintendo's efforts in creating this game. As I mentioned last video, the Zelda series oftentimes is a medium for Nintendo to push its latest technology. Ocarina of Time was no exception, with this not only being a major title for the Nintendo 64, but originally for a floppy disk drive peripheral called 64DD.
こんな楽しいゲームができるのは 64DD ランドネットだけ。新作ソフトも続々 64DD ランドネット。
The double D has been reported to stand for disk drive or dynamic drive, and it was intended to add additional storage onto the discs themselves as well as a real-time clock and internet connectivity. So while Super Mario 64 was meant to pave the way into the third dimension on the N64 cartridge, Ocarina of Time was meant to take it a step further with the 64DD. But due to delays on the hardware release, the Ocarina of Time project would be shifted to the N64 cartridge, making it one of the largest file sizes produced by Nintendo at that time. As for the DD, it was originally slated for a 1996 release, but after numerous delays, it wouldn't be released to the public until December 1999, and was only available to the Japanese market. Nintendo would launch the 64DD as a package with their online service called the RANNet Starter Kit, which included a modem, a mouse, a microphone, 1 year of internet service, and 6 games sent through the mail. This peripheral failed hard, and the RANNet service was shut down in less than a year, with the introduction of the GameCube and Game Boy Advance being the final nail in the coffin for the DD. There were only 10 games released for the device, and at the time of the discontinuation of the internet service, only 15,000 active subscriptions. There aren't concrete sales numbers on this thing, but it's safe to say it wasn't turning any heads. If things with the 64DD went a little differently, it would have been pretty poetic to see Ocarina of Time developed for it, considering the original Legend of Zelda was also for the disc peripheral made for the original Famicom. And while Shigeru Miyamoto was heavily involved and stepped up as producer of Ocarina of Time, His attention was more focused on directing Super Mario 64. In comparison, Ocarina of Time had a whopping 5 directors. Toru Osawa, known for his work on Kid Icarus and the Famicom Detective Club games, Yoichi Yamada, who was assistant director for A Link to the Past and Star Fox, Eiji Aonuma, who was mainly a graphics designer before Ocarina of Time and is now currently the head producer of the Zelda franchise, Yoshiaki Koizumi, who contributed the story beats of A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, and finally Toshio Iwawaki, one of the major programmers for both the Mario and Zelda series. These directors were put in charge of different aspects of the game like sound, camera, scenario, and planning. Aside from their work on Super Mario 64, the venture into 3D gaming was brand new to this team. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of ideas swirling around for this title. There was an Iwata-ass segment centered around the release of the Ocarina of Time remaster for the 3DS, where these developers gathered together to talk about their experiences making the original game. It's packed with really insightful information on not just Zelda, but game development as a whole, so I encourage you all to read it yourself. But Miyamoto wanted to implement within Ocarina of Time the theme of chanbara, a term used to describe the samurai sword fighting genre of Japanese cinema. Osawa mentions that he started the script with chanbara in mind from the very beginning, and this would serve as one of the very early themes they used to piece the concept of the game together. Yoshiaki Koizumi mentions that even before they developed Super Mario 64, he was experimenting with recreating Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, with a thin polygon Link that was seen from the side angle while fighting with his sword. But he mentions he couldn't really bring that Zelda 2 recreation to life at that time, but his desire to make a working 3D Link would carry over to the Ocarina of Time team. Koizumi would go on to develop the model for Link for the game, but during development, he mentions he was approached by Miyamoto with the idea of making the game a first-person title. Miyamoto made the suggestion to have the player explore the world as Link in first person, and then when engaged in combat, the camera would shift to a side view to show Link's model during combat. This was mainly suggested to avoid dealing with the Nintendo 64's hardware limitations, as it would be a challenge to program a full character model running around in such a detailed world. In response, Koizumi said, quote,
"Nah, I'ma do my own thing."
While it wasn't very nice of me toward Miyamoto-san, I didn't try a first-person scene even once. I was making the model for Link, so I couldn't stand to see my Link not appear. So the whole chanbara theme would be implemented into the new combat system, with battles feeling more cinematic than ever before. An important part of getting this right was the Z targeting system, which became a crucial part of Zelda combat mechanics since then. The player would press the Z button on the N64 controller to have Link focus on the enemy, allowing him to use the joystick to direct his dodges and attacks. Initially, there would be a generic marker introduced to show that the player was Z targeting, but Koizumi would upgrade this marker into a fairy to add a little bit more personality. They'd named this fairy target marker the Fairy Navigation System, or Navi for short. And Navi here would evolve into her own character and an important part of the overall story. Koizumi said, "I thought, this is Navi," and ideas started coming to me one after the other, like being able to tell by color whether the person you're facing is good or bad.
What do you mean by that?
And if Navi talked, she could be an important guide for the story. So naming the system Navi really helped it grow. Koji Kondo would once again return to compose the music, which became an integral part of both storytelling and gameplay. The name Ocarina of Time isn't just for show, as they implemented mechanics with Link's Ocarina, allowing him to play different songs that will assist him on his journey. Ocarina of Time would become one of the most anticipated games of that decade, and though Nintendo had a hit with Super Mario 64, PlayStation was serving as a major competitor at this moment, so they needed another hit title to cement the Nintendo 64's place in the gaming market. So, holiday 1998 comes around, and I'm sure you all know the rest. This game is still revered as one of the greatest games of all time, and during its release year, it was praised with almost perfect scores across the board. More than 1 million copies were sold in less than a week, and it would become one of the best-selling games of 1998. If you're curious, Pokemon came out that same year and did ridiculously well, and maybe one day I'll finally cover that series before I die of old age. But all that aside, Hyrule's in disarray, so let's check up on Link. So 7 years have passed, Ganondorf runs the world, and Link is now a teenager. So he sets off into Hyrule to find the remaining sages so they can imprison Ganondorf in the Sacred Realm. This sounds like that one story that was in the intro of A Link to the Past. You all should check out that video. So Link has to go around to 5 temples across Hyrule that Ganon has under his control and awaken those sages. Before he sets off though, he meets Sheik, a ninja warrior who serves as his ally and guide throughout the journey. But look at that, we happen to meet most of these people when Link was a child. Yes, the sages are Saria, sage of the forest, and his friend from the Kokiri forest, Princess Ruto of the Zoras, and Sage of Water, Darunia, leader of the Gorons and Sage of Fire, and Impa, who is the Sage of Shadow. The 5th sage is Nabooru, Sage of Spirit and a member of the Gerudo tribe. But I'll turn my attention to Link's return to the Kokiri Forest since it's one of the most important moments of the game. After defeating Phantom Ganon within the Forest Temple and awakening Saria as the Sage of the Forest, Link meets the Great Deku Sprout. Aww. Yes, a new Great Deku tree has begun to grow as the new spirit of the forest. This cute little sprout reveals to Link his true origins. Though he was raised in Kokiri Forest, Link was not a part of their tribe by blood. Many years ago, Hyrule was a disjointed country engulfed in a struggle known as the Hyrulean Civil War. Link's mother, who was gravely injured during the war, retreated with her baby to the forest and entrusted the child to the Deku Tree. Unfortunately, Link's mother passed away from her wounds, but the Deku Tree prophesied Link's great importance to the kingdom and took him in as one of the Kokiri tribe. And Link is completely unfazed by this story. So with 6 of the 7 sages awakened, Link returns to the Temple of Time to meet with Sheik, who reveals himself to be Princess Zelda! Me blood clot. I'm sure everyone knew this by now, but there's gonna be at least one comment saying I spoiled it for them, I know it. Zelda is the final sage, and even though Hyrule is looking a little glum, it's revealed that Ganondorf only has one piece of the Triforce of Power. This occurred because I guess the Triforce realized how evil this dude was. So the remaining pieces went to Link and Zelda. And with that in mind, Ganondorf scoops up Zelda,
Oh no!
Which makes me think she should have just stayed as Sheik. Enough is enough. Time for Link and the sages to fight back. So Link heads to Ganondorf's fortress to end his tyranny once and for all. And while he manages to beat him initially and rescue Zelda, Ganondorf isn't finished, using the Triforce of Power to mutate into a giant beast named Ganon. And it's more or less confirmed that this is the same Ganon that's imprisoned in A Link to the Past. Kinda. Okay, so Link defeats Ganon and the sages manage to imprison him once and for all, sealing him within the Dark Realm while he yells about getting revenge on everyone and their descendants. I guess we won't worry about that, right? And with everyone victorious, Zelda grants Link his childhood back, using the Ocarina of Time to send him back in time to live his life in peace. He and Navi part ways.
Wow, what an asshole.
And Link heads over to Hyrule Castle to inform the king of Ganon's plans, preventing his rise to power altogether and maintaining peace in the kingdom. Now I know when I started this I mentioned I'd be giving less attention to the official Zelda timeline, as I'm not really fully subscribed to the idea of a Zelda timeline in the first place, but Ocarina of Time would serve as a jump off point for 3 separate timelines. Yeah, things are pretty simple until Link here started messing with the space-time continuum. So all the games we've covered up to this point that were released before Ocarina of Time are in what's known as the Fallen Hero timeline. This particular timeline entertains the idea that Link was defeated by Ganon during the events of Ocarina of Time, which led to the 7 sages imprisoning Ganon anyway. These events are more or less covered in the intro to A Link to the Past, with Link's Awakening serving as a mini-sequel starring the same Link. After a long period of time, Hyrule falls into turmoil again with Ganon taking over Hyrule, and that leads to the events of the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, starring yet another Link. But long story short, at this point in the Zelda series, there are 3 different Links. Now the other 2 timelines created from the events of Ocarina of Time are known as the Child Timeline and the Adult Timeline. The Adult Timeline has a bit of a confusing name, but it's essentially the events that occur after Ganon was defeated at the end of Ocarina of Time. So even though Link was sent back to his childhood, time still went on for Zelda and the others, who presumably had to clean up the mess Ganon left in his wake. It's mostly called the Adult Timeline since this was the time period where Adult Link existed. So that brings us to the other timeline known as the Child Timeline. Events that occur once Link is sent back in time to live out the rest of his days at the end of Ocarina of Time. With him snitching on Ganondorf and avoiding a war completely, the Hero of Time goes on a journey to find his friend Navi, and in doing so, he meets with a terrible fate. So Ocarina of Time was a major success for Nintendo, but the developers didn't stop there. Remember at the time this game was finished, Nintendo still had the delayed 64DD on the back burner. They continued to work on a Zelda game that would be compatible with the DD, codenamed Ura Zelda, also known as Another Zelda. Miyamoto is pretty upfront with IGN during an interview in 1998 when asked about this project. Ocarina of Time has been designed with the disk drive system in mind. More specifically, if you connect Zelda with the disk drive, an icon will appear on screen announcing Ura Zelda. There were several ideas that I could not incorporate because of the time shortage and other reasons. In the future, I want some new areas and new dungeons to be available for players who have already finished Ocarina of Time. Shortly after this interview, the project was delayed indefinitely and eventually cancelled due to the 64DD's performance on the market. If we fast forward a little bit to 2002, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker was the major upcoming Zelda release for the Nintendo GameCube. To promote the release of this title, Nintendo offered a pre-order bonus disc with a GameCube port of Ocarina of Time, alongside the never-before-seen Buddha Zelda, or as we'd know it in the West, Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Eventually, Nintendo would distribute this disc within GameCube bundles as the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition, which not only included both versions of Ocarina of Time, but the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2 as well. I guess including A Link to the Past would have been too much of a steal. Ocarina of Time Master Quest was mostly identical to the original, with the majority of the changes being within the dungeons. They would get all new layouts and were meant to be a bit more challenging for veterans of the game, including some more thought-provoking puzzles than the original. So if you ever wanted to change things up a little bit, try this version of the game out sometime and see what you think. But I also have to give props to the gorgeous 3DS remake of the game, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time 3D. Released in 2011, Ocarina of Time 3D was co-developed by Japanese developer Grezzo, who is known for titles like Miitopia, The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes, and the 3DS remaster of Luigi's Mansion. You've seen clips from this version of the game throughout the video, and I highly recommend this title if you happen to have a 3DS. It looks exactly how my child self thought the original game looked when I played it back in 1998. Not only are the visuals stunning, but the developers even left the original bugs in the game intentionally so that it remained faithful to the N64 version. Of course, it utilizes the 3DS hardware to its advantage, using the built-in touchscreen for inventory management and the gyroscopic tech for aiming and looking around with the camera. It even bundled in the Master Quest versions of the dungeons too.
Everything is flipped horizontally, but also the position of enemies, items, and puzzles are different from the original world.
They did go back and make the water temple a little less confusing though. I know at least one of you watching had a terrible time with the original water temple. So in Ocarina of Time 3D, they changed the colors of some of the doors and walls, making it easier for the player to differentiate textures and have a more pleasant time navigating. You also don't have to pause the game like 100 times to switch between the iron boots and Kokiri boots. Now you just look down at your touchscreen and give one of the menu buttons a quick tap.
BAM! There it is.
Now I know we won't be seeing this version of the game ported for a long time, but fingers crossed, as I think this remaster stands the test of time. There was a short prequel comic published as a special edition in the German Club Nintendo magazine. The first two parts introduce Link's parents and shed some light on their struggles during the Hyrulean Civil War. And in this comic, Link's father is introduced as a royal soldier who warns Link's mother of the impending war that looms over Hyrule. He says the dispute was caused between two factions, one side who wants to involve Hyrule in the war between the Gorons and the Zora, and the other who wish to remain neutral. So instead of those two options, they decide to declare war on themselves.
Stupid.
You stupid.
Link's father wishes to keep Link far away from death and misery, and they would all flee together with Link if shit hits the fan. Unfortunately that night, war breaks out, and more unfortunately, Link's papa is head of the guards that night.
Damn.
And as this violent faction storms the castle to dethrone the king, Link's father dies from a mortal wound while protecting his leader. Link's mother sticks to the plan and flees to the Kokiri Forest, known for swallowing up outsiders within its depths. But still, she manages to gain an audience with the Great Deku Tree, who's convinced that Link is the chosen one. He agrees to raise Link as one of the Kokiri and grants Link's mother access to the village, but in an interesting twist, anyone that's not a Kokiri is unable to survive within the village, Link being a special exception. And despite knowing the risks, she enters the village anyway to drop off Link, and is changed into a tree, destined to become a part of this immortal Kokiri forest. Now, as far as I know, this isn't a thing in the actual game, as the Great Deku Tree mentions there's a barrier around the forest to keep outsiders away. But nobody mentioned anything about people turning into trees. The events of the comic has me thinking that this Great Deku Sprout lied to Link about his mother dying from her wounds when their magic turned her into a tree instead. Tell us, Kokiris, which one of these houses is Link's mom? The other two parts of the comic are a little less involved, with part 3 showing a moment where Child Link meets his older self, who explains the importance of time travel. This panel seems like a huge paradox to me, and I'm surprised the universe didn't implode on itself here. Part 4 is mostly the beginning of events of the game in comic book form, covering Link's adventure from his first meeting with Navi to his fated meeting with Princess Zelda at Hyrule Castle. I mainly wanted to cover these as I found the prequel events pretty interesting and haven't heard others talk about them much. Even if they're not official, there's no reason for these events not to be true in my opinion. And for some reason, I always imagined Link's father as one of the knights in the war, only to find out it wasn't mentioned at all in the actual game. So I'll chalk that up to the Mandela effect. In the year 2000, there was also a Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time manga created by author Akira Himekawa. Alright, so here's the thing. I'd really love to cover the manga for like each of the Zelda games, but it's gonna be hard for me to get my hands on a lot of these books in time for each video, but I can't seem to track down a lot of these volumes in digital form. I would have to order the paperbacks and have them come in and actually read through them and then write a script based around that. So I'd like to know if you guys are interested in me covering all the Zelda manga as a whole, because that would require a little bit more preparation, but let me know in the comments below. With that said, I think I've exhausted Ocarina of Time content, and while this game is covered ad nauseum on YouTube already, I can't deny that this game is that important to not only the Zelda franchise as a whole, but to gaming history. Our story continues after the events of Ocarina of Time, with Link, the hero of time, living out the remainder of his childhood in his peaceful timeline. Link is on a journey to find his fairy friend Navi, who just up and bounced once the timeline was saved. And the crazy thing about this is that Link never sees Navi again. The game doesn't even solve this plotline. The adventure this time begins with a weary Link and his trusted steed Epona, navigating a dense forest, oblivious to the unseen eyes tracking their every move. Two mischievous fairies under the command of Skull Kid ambush Link, and they all steal Link's Ocarina of Time and make off with Epona. Link is led through the forest, dragged by his own horse, and left at the entrance of a mysterious cave. This is where Link finds out how deep the rabbit hole goes. Skull Kid confronts Link once again after getting rid of his horse, but to add insult to injury, he casts a curse on Link, transforming him into a Deku Scrub. And this transformation isn't quick either, it's like he mentally torments Link in some type of advanced genjutsu. Skull Kid runs off deeper into the cave, leaving behind one of the two fairies who we learn is named Tattle. But she kinda deserved this because she stayed behind to bully Link, so it looks like these two are stuck together now. And as Link grapples with the loss of his horse, a body that's not his own, and a snarky fairy companion, he finds himself facing a daunting choice: to plunge deeper into the unknown, where who knows what horrors and adventures await. This guy awaits. Yes, the famous "you've met with a terrible fate, haven't you" guy. This is the proprietor of the Happy Mask shop, who travels far and wide collecting and selling masks. He tells Link that he's on a journey to find a mask that was stolen from him, which as it stands turns out to be the one on Skull Kid's face. The salesman strikes a deal with Link: return to him the Ocarina of Time, and he'll restore Link's normal human form, but in exchange, he must hunt down Skull Kid and retrieve the stolen mask. Oh, and you need to do this in 3 days. And it looks like Mario got his soul stolen here too. So with this objective in mind, our journey unfolds as Link and Tattle step foot into Clocktown, the heart of the land of Termina. But before we delve deeper into this story, if you've ventured through Ocarina of Time's expansive world, you should recognize Skull Kid and the masked salesman already. Skull Kid can be found in the Lost Woods in Ocarina of Time, and is befriended when Link plays Saria's song for him, which earns Link a piece of heart as a gift. It's a pretty minor appearance, but it's interesting nonetheless, since they made him one of the major antagonists here. The masked salesman can be found opening his shop in the Castle Town Market, which gives Link the ability to borrow masks and trade them with people throughout Hyrule. But the reuse of these characters was totally intentional, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the development part of this video. So tangent aside, the player is now free to roam and explore Termina, but it's not long before the game reveals a particular sense of dread that's stuck with players for years. This moon is gonna come crashing down in 3 days, destroying everyone and everything in its wake. So Link is more or less helpless in this situation, and by the final day manages to track down Skull Kid at the top of the clock tower. Tattle's brother, Tao, TheMentok from the future here. I just want to point out that this character's name is pronounced Tail, and I'm sure a lot of you knew that already, but old childhood habits die hard. Thank you to Dr. Handsome for leaving a comment on the original video pointing this out to me. After all of these years, my brain has finally corrected this error. Urges Link and his sister to find 4 beings from the swamp, mountain, ocean, and canyon before being swatted aside by Skull Kid, who reigns in the apocalypse. But in a moment of quick thinking, Link hits Skull Kid with a magic bubble blast, managing to grab the Ocarina of Time from him at the very last minute. With the memory of Princess Zelda to guide him, he plays the Song of Time, rewinding the clock to the dawn of the first day. Link has spared Termina some more time. With the Ocarina of Time in hand, Link can now regain his body from the Happy Mask salesman, who teaches him the Song of Healing. With this song, Link is normal again, and the mask salesman has held up his end of the bargain, but is enraged that Link did not bring back the mask as he had promised. This guy's temper tantrums were terrifying back in the day, and y'all can't tell me different. But we learn that the stolen mask is known as Majora's Mask, an accursed item from legend that's said to have been used by some ancient tribe in cursed rituals. Upon its wearer, it bestows great power and channels evil, which explains what happened to poor Skull Kid here. The ancients attempted to seal the mask at some point to prevent it from being misused, but for some reason it's just laying around, and this guy wants it. So sure, let's help him out. But more importantly, Tato suggests Link follow her brother's advice and seek out the 4 beings in the 4 regions of Termina. So our objectives are clear, and Link officially begins his new adventure. This part of the video is where I take a break from the story and talk about development, so let's do that.
Okay.
After the huge success of Ocarina of Time, Nintendo couldn't afford to let the extensive effort invested in creating that game go to waste without leveraging its game engine and assets for a new project. This time, a more compact team consisting of Eiji Aonuma, Shigeru Miyamoto, and Yoshiaki Koizumi took the helm, determined to craft a follow-up to Ocarina of Time. As you all might know from the last video, the team worked on the Nintendo 64DD version of Ocarina of Time, an enhanced version of the game with remade dungeons. And this project is what we'd eventually know as Ocarina of Time Master Quest. Eiji Aonuma, on the other hand, didn't want to remake the same dungeons. He began brainstorming new concepts and approached Miyamoto with the idea of creating an entirely new game. Miyamoto agreed to the proposal, but imposed a stringent 1-year deadline, or else the moon would fall and destroy them all. So the race was on, and to meet this tight schedule, they repurposed a significant portion of existing content from Ocarina of Time, significantly reducing their development time. Yoshiaki Koizumi proposed the idea of a 3-day system where players would have to play the same moments over and over again. Originally, the developers toyed with a week-long time frame, but the demands of in-game character schedules led to a shift to a 3-day cycle. That looming moon, descending ominously from the sky, was a unique idea born from the imagination of Koizumi as well. Inspired by his daydream of the actual moon falling to Earth, he decided to incorporate this into the game. In an interview with Famitsu, Koizumi mentions that they drew inspiration from the 1998 film Run Lola Run, where a girl relives the same critical period multiple times, influencing outcomes with each iteration. This idea served as the foundation for Majora's Mask, infusing it with a sense of urgency and depth. And while the gameplay has similarities to its predecessor, Majora's Mask introduced a groundbreaking feature as well, the mask transformation system. Masks aren't merely cosmetic, they became central to the main quest and side quests, adding depth and intrigue to the game itself. But we'll explore some of these masks shortly. Stepping up once again to compose the score was the legendary Koji Kondo, but joining him this time was the talented newcomer Toru Minagishi. Majora's Mask marked Minagishi's debut in the Zelda series, a journey that would see him contribute to other beloved titles like The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, and later on, the Splatoon series. Interestingly enough, Minagishi is also the mind behind that iconic GameCube startup jingle. Before its official release, Majora's Mask would be known as Zelda Gaiden, or Zelda Side Story. The name Majora itself is a unique localization of the Japanese Mujura's Mask, a playful fusion of the art director Takaya Imamura's name and Jura, inspired by his love of Jurassic Park. I always thought the origins of that name would be a lot more profound, but here we are. So Majora's Mask made its debut on the Nintendo 64 in April 2000 in Japan, and later that year in October in North America. Anyway, we head back to Termina. Link has his body back, and with only Tal's clue about the 4 places to go on, Link and Tatl must travel to 4 different dungeons in Termina to free 4 giants from the evil lurking within those dungeons. And while there are only 4 major dungeons in this game, what I think really sets this apart from the rest of the series is its very unique side quest. The game is stuffed with all of these weird encounters that sometimes leave you asking more questions, or they might just bring a tear to your eye. If you're not making a beeline to the end of the game, Link can meet several different characters within Termina, all with their own schedules in this 3-day time frame. This contributes to remarkable world building and helps give these citizens even more colorful personalities than what we experienced in Ocarina of Time. One of the most popular side quests is that of Kafei and Anju, the only side quest that will take the entire 3-day cycle to complete. These 2 individuals promised to marry when they were children and planned that they would have that destined day occur during the Carnival of Time, the event that takes place on the final day when the moon is plunging into Termina. So when Link meets Anju, she asks him to keep an eye out for her fiancé, as he suddenly disappeared with his wedding ceremony mask just a month before the actual wedding, while her mother is accusing him of running off with her best friend. Anju is afraid of finding out the truth, worried that Kafei disappeared because of her. Link will eventually encounter Kafei, who's been turned into a child by the Skull Kid, and to make matters worse, his wedding mask was stolen while he was on his way to ask the Great Fairy for help. If you manage to see this quest to its end, you can find Anju in her room in the last few hours of the final day, pledging to wait for her fiancé in her final minutes. The lovers will reunite in this moment, exchanging vows and staying right where they are to face whatever fate may befall them. Please take refuge. We're fine here. We shall greet the morning together.
Nope.
Aonuma said, quote, "The inspiration for that particular side quest actually came shortly after Ocarina of Time when I went to a wedding party for one of the members of our staff. At the time we were thinking about what sorts of events we could include in Majora's Mask, and I was talking with Mr. Koizumi, who directed the game with me. And we said to each other, I can't recall seeing weddings portrayed in a game like this before. It would be really interesting if you had 3 days leading up to the wedding, but there was this horrible cataclysm happening alongside it. That could be really impactful, we thought." Okay, Zelda aside for a second, imagine your friends having a conversation like this at your wedding. Either way, we got one of the most touching scenes in the game because of this moment. Then there's the mystery of the Romani Ranch, a place where you meet Romani and her older sister Cremia as they deal with the threat of creatures simply known as them. Oh look, Epona's alive. When you first meet Romani, she'll ask for your help whenever they come, which already sets the tone of a rather sinister force looming over this ranch. Cremia, on the other hand, as the elder sister, has a responsibility to run the ranch due to the passing of their father, her mind preoccupied with things going wrong on the ranch ever since she took over. We find out later that this is the result of sabotage from the Gorman brothers from a rival ranch. So with all of these issues going on, Cremia doesn't have much time to spend with Romani. Little does she know, if you wait until nighttime on the ranch on the night of the first day, they will appear. Yep, straight up aliens, here to steal cows and everything else. So it's up to Link to stop them from approaching the ranch, and if he fails, they will beam up the cows and Romani along with them. This doesn't even trigger a game over though. Time moves on and we'll see Romani back at the ranch the next day, traumatized and dead inside from her time of being abducted. According to Aonuma, there was a UFO boom in Japan happening at the time this game was developed, and he said, quote, "Thought it would be really interesting and scary to use in a game. That's why we decided to go with that."
Sensational.
Of course, if Link manages to hold off the invasion, this opens the door to more side quests, and ultimately Romani and Cremia will have a closer relationship through Link's actions. Okay, if that one wasn't weird enough for you, how about this hand sticking out of the toilet? If Link enters the restroom of the Stockpot Inn on any night between 12 AM and 6 AM, this hand will surface from the toilet asking for paper. You can simply give it any letter items you may have or title deeds and it will be satisfied, rewarding Link with a piece of heart that fell into the toilet. I would ask how exactly that fell in, but there's literally a hand sticking out of a toilet here. This hand would also make an appearance in Oracle of Ages and Skyward Sword, and during the time of the release of Skyward Sword, Entertainment Weekly would ask Miyamoto about this. In a couple of different Zelda games, there's a mysterious hand that appears that's never really explained. In Skyward Sword, the hand appears in a toilet. Can you explain to me what that hand is? Miyamoto responds, "In the original Legend of Zelda game, a gigantic hand appears and grabs you at the entrance to a dungeon. Actually, that has nothing to do with Skyward Sword. It's actually something from a Japanese ghost story, not a specific ghost story. There are some ghost stories in Japan where, when you're sitting in the bathroom in the traditional style of the Japanese toilet, a hand is actually trying to grab you from beneath. It's a very scary story." The last side quest I'll cover is one of my favorites, and that's the story of Pamela and her father at the Music Box House. In Ikana Canyon, there is a special house with a water wheel that plays a song known as Farewell to Gibdos, a special song used to drive away Gibdos and other evil spirits in the area. But when Link first arrives to the house, the river has dried up, causing the water wheel powering it to come to a stop. So it's surrounded by Gibdos now, and inside the house is a girl named Pamela who refuses to open the door for Link, believing that he's one of those Gibdos attempting to take her father away. Link can discover the source of the water drying up, which turns out to be a man named Sharp who put a curse on the spring water cave, which can be undone with the Song of Storms. Once Link has the water flowing again, the Music Box House plays the melody again that drives away the Gibdos, and Link can now sneak into the house where he'll find Pamela's father locked inside the basement, half mummified, struggling to hold on to his humanity. Once he plays the Song of Healing, her father can be healed of his curse, allowing us to witness this touching scene. These contained but powerful stories within Majora's Mask make this game as memorable as it is. And with the final days hovering over the heads of the people of Termina, it makes each of these stories more impactful the deeper you dig in. Let me know your favorite side quest in the comments below, because I know I'm missing a few here. But within these side quests, the theme of masks still rings true, as Link can obtain collectible masks as a reward for completion. For example, seeing the Anjo and Cafe quest to its end will have them gift Link with the couple's mask, or while Pamela has this tear-jerking reunion with her cured father, a Gibdo mask will be on the floor for Link to collect. There are 20 collectible masks in all, which excludes the 3 transformation masks that Link will obtain throughout the story. These 3 masks are crucial to plot progression and include the Deku mask, Goron mask, and Zora mask, allowing Link to transform into these 3 races and use their abilities. If this game wasn't dark enough though, each of these transformation masks represent a deceased individual from each race, like the Goron mask for instance, embodying the soul of Darmani III, a Goron hero that was a great warrior of the tribe who succumbed to a fall from the mountains of the Snowhead region due to a blizzard. The Deku mask is from the dead son of the butler who served the Deku King. You encounter him at the very beginning of the game as a withered tree, his soul turned to a mask by the Skull Kid to curse Link. And to take it a step further, it was always a bit jarring seeing Link have to go through what seems like a painful transformation every time. Aonuma would actually be asked about these transformations by Game Informer and why it looked like it hurt so much for Link, to which he responded, "We're talking about masks that were created to contain the memories of people who have died. Often there are things they really wanted to do before they left this world, so becoming them is actually really painful because it's like hosting a really powerful spirit that's coming into you." After reading all of these interviews, I wonder why Aonuma hasn't directed an all-out horror game yet. So we head back to our main plot. Link travels to each region, guided by the advice of Tao. The first being the southern swamp and home to the Deku Kingdom, where he frees the spirit of the Mask of Odalwa, the major boss for that area. Next is Snowhead Mountain, the home of the Gorons, where Link defeats Goat at Snowhead Temple to free the second giant. The third giant is liberated from Hjorg in the Great Bay, home of the Zoras, and finally in the Ikana Canyon, Link will take on Twin Mold to free the final giant.
Light work, no reaction.
For those who engaged in conversations with Anju's grandmother throughout the game, they were treated to a fascinating nugget of lore about these giants. In the distant past, before the land of Termina was fractured into 4 regions, a single realm thrived with the presence of 4 benevolent giants. And these mighty beings made a pact to watch over the land's inhabitants, and if they were ever needed, a powerful call would summon them. But of course, there's a dark twist to this tale. One imp, feeling abandoned by his giant friends, spiraled into bitterness and began sowing discord across the 4 worlds. In response to this menace, the people of Termina resorted to summoning the giants, leading to an act of exile. The imp was even more saddened that his old friends would threaten him, so he returns to the heavens to hide out from their anger, and peace was restored to the 4 worlds. This is a pretty obvious tale of Skull Kid's origins, and I think the implication here is that he was exiled from Termina and found himself spending his time in the lost woods of Hyrule. But let's see what he has to say for himself later at the end of the game. Each of these regions that Link visits has its own problems caused by the Skull Kid, which harkens back to the setup of Ocarina of Time and Ganon's influence on Hyrule. The swamp of the Deku Kingdom has been poisoned, and their princess kidnapped, all while the Deku King is trying to put this monkey to death for what happened to the princess. The Snowhead region is suffering an eternal winter as the Gorons can only look to a transformed Link for hope, thinking he's actually their tragic hero Darmani III who's come to save the day. In the Great Bay, a Zora guitarist gives his dying wish to Link to save his vocalist Lulu's eggs that he was mortally wounded trying to retrieve from pirates. And Ikana Canyon, a region filled with the undead after Skull Kid cast a curse, causing these monsters to run amok and roam free. The situation in Termina seems dire, and many have lost their lives or have been irreversibly cursed from the actions of Skull Kid. And much like the side quest I mentioned earlier, each of these situations seem catastrophic, but there's this persistent theme of hope and acceptance that shines through all of these stories, with Link serving as the catalyst. All of these major quests and side quests must be completed while the player keeps an eye on the 3-day cycle, but with the Ocarina of Time, Link has tools at his disposal to slow down or speed up time if need be, which comes in handy so you're not rushing or waiting around too much throughout the game. Despite this, the 3-day cycle can still become a bit tedious, especially if you're a completionist. I think we tend to look back a lot on the story aspects of this game, which I think is what makes it shine, but I have to mention that the time constraints do make certain parts of this a bit rough. Speaking of story, apologies, but I'm going to be going a bit heavy on the plot for the next few minutes, so bear with me. Once all the giants are free, the player can now face Skull Kid on the final day at the top of the clock tower. It's time for your fated rematch. The sequence of events will begin very similar to the first fight, but this time Link is prepared. He whips out his ocarina and plays Oath to Order to summon the 4 giants that he freed, all coming to his aid as they stop the moon from its descent. I still think this scene is awesome. I can't put my finger on why, but it just is. With the moon stopped, Tal and Tattle are reunited, but this is not over yet. This is where we find out Majora's Mask itself was the one causing all the harm in the first place, taking advantage of a lonely Skull Kid to do its bidding. With this in mind, the mask throws Skull Kid aside and ascends into the moon to consume the world, so we gotta head inside and finish him off. Huh. That's not what I was expecting. So if you went out of your way to complete all the side quests in the game, there's one last strange occurrence that happens before it's time to face the final boss. Within the moon are these 4 children, all wearing the mask of the bosses you've faced up to this point. And at the center, a child wearing Majora's Mask. If you offer up your collectible mask to these children, they'll put you through hide and seek trials, testing your skills with each of the transformation masks. But as you find these children in each trial, they'll start asking these thought-provoking questions like, if you do the right thing, does it really make everybody happy?
Damn!
But by the end of the last trial, you would have given up all of your collectible masks. So when it's time to speak with the kid who has Majora's Mask on, he gives you the Fierce Deity's Mask, the last transformation mask and the most powerful mask in the game. It allows Link to transform into a Super Saiyan adult version of himself essentially, but I find the description of the mask pretty interesting. Could this mask's dark powers be as bad as Majora? If all of these transformation masks possesses the soul of a deceased individual, whose soul is inside this mask? This isn't really answered in game, but Game Informer did present this question to Aonuma as well. The best I can give you is just a suggestion. The best way to think about it is that the memories of all the people of Termina are inside of the Fierce Deity mask. Personally, this feels like a hand wave to me, but I'll take that explanation. And there's also these kids within the moon here. Who are they? They somewhat resemble the mask salesman, and one of them even says to Link, "Masks, you have a lot. You too will be a mask salesman?" People still speculate the meaning of these scenarios to this day, but let's get to the ending first before I present the theories. So the child with Majora's Mask asked to play a game of good guys against bad guys, with Link playing the bad guy. It's time for the final showdown with Majora's Mask. Link will have to face the evil within the mask itself, which evolves into 2 different forms, Majora's Incarnate, which for some reason is doing a whole Russian squat dance, and the final form, Majora's Wrath, a whole ass demon. Sometimes I think game developers ask themselves how they could scare the piss out of children back in the early 3D days. Anyway, once Majora's Wrath is defeated, it evaporates from existence along with the moon that placed the future of Termina in the balance. Peace is restored, and Termina can once again see the dawn of a new day. We see Skull Kid make peace with the 4 giants once again, reassuring him that he is still their friend, and they return to the 4 corners of the land to continue watching over the people. Skull Kid, overwhelmed with emotion, makes peace with the situation and asks to be Link's friend as well, remembering the time where he played Saria's song for him in the Lost Woods. Just as a quick aside, this line here is debated whether it's Link or Saria that Skull Kid is referring to. I guess I'll leave that one up for you guys to decide, but I believe the main implication here is that this is the same Skull Kid you befriend in the Lost Woods. Even though I know there's multiple, I think they're trying to highlight that this is the same one. With the evil fully purged from Majora's Mask, Link holds up his end of the bargain with the mask salesman, who finally claims the mask and bids everyone farewell before disappearing. So Link, Skull Kid, Tattle, and Tal part ways, with Link heading back to Hyrule as the Carnival of Time can finally go on without a hitch. The credits give some closure to the people of Termina that Link meets along the way, like showing the wedding of Anju and Kafei, or Romani and Cremia practicing archery together, and in the final shot, we see Link continuing through the forest as we zoom into a drawing carved into a tree stump, with Skull Kid, Link, the fairies, and the four giants being friends. And this is where we say goodbye to this incarnation of Link as a main character. Majora's Mask is a Zelda title that leaves a lot for discussion even to this day. Like, the world of Termina itself is somewhat of a mystery, but is mostly chalked up as a parallel dimension to Hyrule, which I wouldn't think is too far-fetched since we've seen a few Zelda games already tread that territory. Somehow Link falls into this realm after chasing down a possessed Skull Kid, much like Alice stumbling into Wonderland, and if we take the legends of the four giants scaring off Skull Kid into another world, it makes a lot of sense that he fled to Hyrule to escape their anger, hiding out there before discovering Majora's Mask, which probably gave him the power and courage to return to wreak havoc in Termina in the first place. At some points within these events, he befriended Tatl and Tal, who helped support him when he felt the giants abandoned him. There are other theories from the Zelda Encyclopedia which hardcore Zelda fans don't seem to fully subscribe to, but it's worth mentioning nonetheless. Their explanation says that after stealing Majora's Mask, a combination of the burdens in the Skull Kid's heart and the evil magic within the mask transformed Termina into this land of races and people, constructed from Skull Kid's memories and imagination, including the four giants as well. I don't know if there's much to prove this, so I agree it's a little strange this would be in a Zelda encyclopedia, but I would love to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments about that. Another mystery I see heavily discussed is the identity of the mask salesman, which isn't really answered within the game either. But it seems to be hinted at that he's some sort of magical being, whether that be a deity of some sort or just some guy with powers, which isn't too out of place in Hyrule if you think about it. I do think that this is meant to be a mystery left open to interpretation and doesn't have one true answer, but seeing as the children of the moon resemble him, it does leave more questions than answers. So while Majora's Mask didn't surpass Ocarina of Time in sales, it was one of the highest grossing games of that year, selling over 1 million copies, and in 2015 got a full remaster for the Nintendo 3DS. Many Zelda enthusiasts enjoy looking at this game under a finer microscope, drawn in by its more mature themes, but much like the game itself dealing with a 3-day time loop, I think with every playthrough of this game, there's always something new to discover and new emotions to feel with these contained stories. That uneasy sense of dread, coupled with that cozy feeling of acceptance and love that we see throughout this game, I think it deserved to be talked about on its own. While the gameplay itself may feel a bit dated, the story structure and the character relationships here truly stand the test of time. Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, a trifecta of peak Nintendo 64 era gaming. With the Zelda franchise successfully shifting over to the 3D plane, I wouldn't be surprised if gamers at the time thought 2D Zelda games like these were completely dead. Until a very magical thing happened.
Zelda returns to Game Boy Color in an adventure too big for just one game. Rated E for everyone, each game sold separately.
This is The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, and Oracle of Ages, released for the Game Boy Color in 2001. An experience for the series that's much more than just some follow-up to Link's Awakening. Did you know that this set of games was initially planned as a trilogy?
No.
If you've played these games, Link's quest to save maidens, named after two of the three golden goddesses of Hyrule, Din and Nehru, may have left you wondering about the absence of the third maiden, named after Furore, the goddess of courage. Ignoring her minor role in these titles, there was indeed a mysterious unreleased third game featuring Furore planned early in development, with this set of games initially codenamed the Triforce series. This was an incredibly ambitious project for the Game Boy Color at the time. This is like right before Game Boy Advance. This game was doing next level shit. They linked together, no pun intended. And it wasn't just the Pokemon style of linking where it was two versions of the same game with slight differences. These were two individual games that, when linked together, would unlock new features, and through this linking feature, the player could reveal the true ending to the events of this saga. And I know this sucked back in the day if you had a very strict video game allowance, like me. Imagine seeing the name Ganon spread across the screen at the end of your game facts guide and realizing the only way to fight him is by buying the other game.
Let me guess.
True story. Let's go through these games in order, starting with Oracle of Seasons. Of course, you can play these two in either order, but most tend to put Seasons first, story-wise. It's a peaceful day in Hyrule, with the beginning of the game introducing us to our hero, Link. But something strange is happening. A force summons him deep within Hyrule Castle to the resting place of the Triforce. Oh, and if you're trying to figure out which Link this is in the timeline, don't sweat the details right now, just enjoy the ride. I'll cover it later though. So Link is summoned by the Triforce and is expected to accept a quest on its behalf. And he immediately gets whisked away to an unfamiliar realm without being able to pack a single thing. And before he can even gather his bearings, the sound of jovial music plays in the distance, and after drawing closer to the sounds, Link meets a traveling troupe, with this cutie patootie in the center. Also, Impa is the troupe's cook, but more on that later. The dancer in the center introduces herself as Din, and tells Link that he's arrived in Holodrum before taking his hand and proceeding to dance on him carnival style. But Link's wild ride is interrupted by this guy, Onyx, General of Darkness, who has come to kidnap the Oracle of Seasons. I'm sure you guys can guess who that is. So yeah, after like 3 seconds, Din gets kidnapped, causing the seasons in Holodrum to fall into chaos. More specifically, her being captured causes the Temple of Seasons to fall into the earth, throwing everything out of whack. So after being forcefully dropped into a completely different land, Link already has to save a maiden. But he loved that dance so much, he's not just gonna let Din come to harm at the hands of Onyx. Or is it Onox? Now with that, Oracle of Seasons begins. Now before I continue, if you have even the slightest urge to try out these games, go ahead and snag them on the Nintendo Switch and then come back. Otherwise, let's break down this magic. So shortly after everything goes down, Link finds himself totally confused, miserable, and stuck in the snow. Awakened by Impa, she reveals herself to be the nurse of Princess Zelda, and I find it really odd that she's introducing herself to Link for the first time. She reveals to Link that Din is the Oracle of Seasons, who has control over the balance of the seasons in Holodrum. This in mind, Zelda sensed dark forces closing in on Din and instructed Impa to find her and take her to Hyrule Castle in secret. So instead, she was here posing as the troupe's cook.
I'm just a cook.
But that doesn't matter now, that plan's totally down the toilet. So instead she tells Link to meet the Maku tree in Horon village to find out what to do next. Following her advice, Link awakens the Maku tree and tells him the situation. And I adore the detail on this tree, by the way. Everything from its sleeping animation to how the shadows are depicted on its trunk. This is like peak Game Boy Color graphics right here. It's amazing. So with the Temple of Seasons out of commission, the Maku tree is drained and sends Link on a quest to find the 8 essences of nature to help restore his power so he can break through the evil that's surrounding Onyx's castle. So Link's mission is now set and the game opens up for you to explore. And this game sticks to the Zelda formula, with Link braving 8 dungeons to obtain all essences of nature. But of course, there's a lot going on in the land of Holodrum to keep Link busy. Like for instance, this mysterious hooded person wandering around early on in the game. Follow them and Link will find out how deep this rabbit hole goes. There is an entire underground realm in this game known as Subrosia, home of the Subrosians. This is where the Temple of Seasons sunk, and after some exploring, Link will discover the Rod of Seasons inside the temple, giving him the ability to change seasons, starting with the power of winter. So gameplay wise, all the player has to do now is jump on a tree stump and use the Rod of Seasons to change the weather. The overworld is heavily designed around this mechanic, with every piece of this map having 4 different versions of it depending on the season. And it's not just a color filter either. Aspects of the overworld will change with each season, like snow to shovel in the winter, vines to climb in the summer, mushrooms that can be picked in the autumn, and flower buds that bloom in the spring. But these aren't the only changes. The seasons affect things like water levels and ice that Link can walk on during the winter. And this cleverly serves as a gate for progression until Link gets the right season in his arsenal to meet the needs of each situation. The game effectively utilizes the technology in the Game Boy Color, making each season extremely vibrant in its own way. It's mwah. The major hub on this map is Horon Village, where you can interact with several villagers, some of them having unique side quests that Link can tackle during the course of the game. But these kind of side quests and events aren't limited just to this village. There are plenty of events that will occur as Link travels the world. Like Maple, for instance, a snarky witch that flies around the map on her broom. If you bump into her, she and Link will drop a bunch of their items, and then they have to race to see who can steal more from the other. The more you encounter Maple, the more this starts to turn into a rivalry, and the event gets pretty ridiculous after a while, with Maple eventually bringing a vacuum cleaner to suck up items, or a flying saucer to get the edge on Link. The game also has the standard trading quest, where Link trades item after item among the inhabitants of Holodrum, which will upgrade him from a book about cuckoos all the way to the Master Sword. One of my favorite side quests stars a couple named Bipin and Blossom, who have recently welcomed a baby into the world. For some reason, during their very first encounter, they let Link choose the name for their son, And as you can see, players can get pretty creative here as long as the name has 6 letters or less. I went with Butts because ass face didn't fit. As you progress through the game, you're meant to keep checking on the child's growth, and Link will be able to make various decisions throughout this quest to determine how Butts here grows up, influencing his personality and whether he grows up to be a hero, a scholar, or someone who mooches off of his parents. And don't worry about how he grows up so fast, the game doesn't explain it, and his parents here pretend like this is absolutely normal. The world of Holodrome also has a pet system, giving the player the option to enlist the help of Ricky the kangaroo, Dimitri the swimming dodongo, or Moosh, this flying bear thing, to help Link traverse certain areas of the world map. You'll need to find specific flutes to be able to permanently summon a specific animal friend, and in the long run you can only be paired with one. Aside from a couple of sections, I didn't use the animals much, but most players agreed Dimitri is the most useful. I got stuck with Moosh, who honestly felt more like a burden than anything else, but he helped me clear these large gaps and pitfalls, so he has that going for him. But fun side quests aside, once you get to the actual dungeons, I have opinions. Growing up, I played countless hours of both Link's Awakening and Oracle of Seasons. Replaying Seasons as an adult, I have more appreciation for all the new mechanics that the developers packed in this game, and I would say they even seemed inspired by dungeons in Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. For instance, the final dungeon, the Sword and Shield Maze, takes place in Subrosia and requires Link to toss giant ice clusters down these fire pits so he can cool down the lower levels and descend to where the boss is. This is great design and probably one of the best dungeons in this game. But some of these other dungeons, they feel cumbersome. When looking back at Link's Awakening, the dungeon design feels pretty timeless. They were well paced and cleverly designed, and a lot of other Zelda games have this sense of accomplishment when you unlock those shortcuts leading back to the entrance. This makes backtracking less of a headache and builds on the idea of progression. Link's Awakening accomplished this with tighter and more compact dungeon design, even though most dungeons were understandably smaller than the ones in future handheld Zelda titles. The dungeons in Oracle of Seasons, on the other hand, often feel tedious, and navigating them can be frustrating. I'd sometimes find myself wandering around dungeons for several minutes trying to get myself back on track or return to a room with the next locked door so I could progress. Maps aren't always helpful, and backtracking involves resolving the same puzzles repeatedly, often locked behind minecarts or trampolines or other gimmicks that are unaccounted for on your map. Mini-bosses are usually a midway point in dungeons, and if you defeat them, you get a warp point back to the entrance for easy access to get back deep into the dungeon. And these bosses were a crucial part of what made Link's Awakening's dungeon design feel so tight and rewarding. But in Oracle of Seasons, these bosses often appear too late to make warp points feel useful. So while Oracle of Seasons was designed to be the more combat-oriented game of the two titles, the real challenge lies in the dungeon navigation and the gauntlet that comes along with that. Despite these issues, I appreciate the challenge and ambition behind larger dungeons, especially within the constraints of the Game Boy Color. I was averaging around 50 minutes to an hour per dungeon, but I'll partly chalk this up to my long 20-year absence from this game. So as Link explores these dungeons leading up to the gripping climax of the game, what was the original plan for these titles? And why are all the bosses here from the original Legend of Zelda? We have to head back to early 1999 and turn our attention to an independent Japanese video game studio known as Flagship. This would be the company that took on the development for both Oracle of Seasons and Ages. Flagship was a third-party team founded by game designer Yoshiki Okamoto, who previously spent many years working at Capcom, heavily contributing to games like Final Fight, Street Fighter II, and the original Resident Evil. After starting up Flagship, he was heavily funded by projects contracted out from Capcom, Sega, and Nintendo. These developers were the muscle behind titles like Resident Evil 2, the Onimusha series, and later on, Kirby titles like Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Okamoto had the idea to remake the original Legend of Zelda and bring it to the Game Boy Color to introduce the original game to new children at the time. If the remake was successful, they would go on to make more ambitious Zelda titles along with sequels that they could pump out in 3 to 4 month intervals. They pitched this idea to Shigeru Miyamoto, a man who needs no introduction, and he would join them in planning out this proposal. However, during the scenario writing phase of development, many of the staff members showed interest in dropping the idea of a remake and just jumping into a brand new Zelda title. This sentiment mostly came from the difficulty in remaking the original Zelda game to be friendly to new players, which makes a lot of sense to me because going back to that title is rough. All the changes they were attempting to make to the remake resulted in a world map that was becoming very different from the original Hyrule, and quickly the team realized their mission was harder than they initially thought. So Flagship returned to Miyamoto for help, who suggested a trilogy of new titles instead, each focusing on different gameplay elements. And so the Triforce series was born. Each title in this trilogy was meant to correlate with a piece of the Triforce, the first being Fushigi no Kinomi Chikara no Sho,
This motherfucker don't miss.
which they roughly translated at the time to The Legend of Zelda, the Acorn of the Mystery Tree, Tale of Power. This was presented to the gaming press at Nintendo Space World 1999, with IGN reporting at that time that this title would have taken place in Hyrule, with Princess Zelda, the Keeper of Seasons, getting kidnapped by Ganon. Ganon would have split the Triforce of Power into 8 pieces, which Link would have had to travel around Hyrule to collect. Ganon would have also have used the Rod of Seasons to beam Hyrule Castle to another dimension, which would lead Link to enlist the help of the Ulra tribe in a mystery tree that houses spirits to save Hyrule. So after hearing that, I'm sure the similarities sound quite obvious, with Din taking the place of Zelda, Onyx taking the place of Ganon, and the Ulra tribe most likely being changed to the Subrosians, with their realm being underground rather than in a different dimension. You can also tell the game started as a remake to the original Zelda since the plot is very similar. But look no further than the actual game to prove this with Dungeon 1, the Gnarled Root Dungeon, pretty much being a reimagination of the very first dungeon in the original game. This explains why the bosses themselves are revamped versions of the original bosses in The Legend of Zelda. In fact, between the original Zelda, Link's Awakening, and A Link to the Past, there are a lot of reused concepts and assets within these titles. Not to mention Facade from Link's Awakening returns as a mini-boss. IGN got to play a 70% complete version of Tale of Power, which included Ricky as their playable animal friend, as well as encounters with Mabel. And the working title for the game would eventually be localized to Mystical Seed of Power, with gameplay focusing on solving puzzles by changing the seasons. And the other 2 games in the trilogy were being developed at the same time, with Nintendo naming them Chie no Sho and Yuki no Sho, which were eventually localized to Mystical Seed of Wisdom and Mystical Seed of Courage. So what happened here? How did the name changes come about, and what happened to this mysterious third game? Well, before we answer these butt-clenching questions, let's wrap up the events of Oracle of Seasons. So while we were busy talking, Link was gathering all the 8 essences of seasons and returned to the fully restored Mako Tree. The Mako Tree gives Link with the energy of the huge Mako Seed, which penetrates the evil barrier surrounding Onyx's castle. When Link draws closer, the true villains behind this plot reveal themselves. Twin Rova, the 2 old lady Gerudos who raised Ganon, and you may recognize them as bosses from Ocarina of Time. We find out that they're up to no good and were behind Onyx's rise to power, warning Link that there's much more evil to go around, and probably low-key enticing kids to go buy the other game.
Welcome to EV Games.
With the path clear, Link rushes to the castle to save Din. And I want to guess that this is probably going to be a full dungeon in itself, because Onyx has like very puny defenses in his castle. It's 3 rooms of enemies, with Facade making yet another cameo. But clear out these baddies and you end up in the throne room with Onyx, who has a few evil things to say, and then the battle starts. To defeat him, all you have to do is land a few spin attacks while avoiding his mace, and in his desperation, he'll start to use Crystallized Din as a shield, which I actually think was a pretty cool idea. But after a while, Link is victorious, but just before he can reach Din, he's dropped into the pits below to face Onyx's true form, a giant dragon. And this is when Link discovers he's an evil being summoned from the Dark Realm by Twin Rova to cause chaos. After another fight, Link manages to vanquish Onyx, who in his final cryptic words reveals to Link that the gears of evil have already begun turning, and Twin Rova's scheme to bring about the Flame of Destruction is progressing as planned. Then he dies. Link saves Din, who thanks him for saving her and hints that there's more going on than meets the eye to convince the player to buy the other game, while Twin Rova further cement the point that their plans are coming to fruition so that the player can go out and buy the other game. And finally, the credits roll, and we see peace returning to Holodrum, with Link and Din visiting most of the characters we met along the way. There's some really cool illustrations in the credits that add a lot of personality to these characters, and I really wish they were in full color. But the game has finally ended, and we get a password at the very end which will allow us to link our game to Oracle of Ages. But before we travel on to Labrina, I want to point out how awesome it is to be able to load up the save and explore Holodrum while it's at peace. Yeah, you can fire up your save at any time and even talk to Din, who's now chilling in Horon Village. She'll let you know that Impa has moved on to another realm by Zelda's orders to help the next maiden. So this is a better time than any to talk about secrets within the 2 titles and features that require the games to be linked. Secrets are passwords that some NPCs in these games will share with Link that can be used in the other game for a variety of rewards, like heart containers or powerful rings. Oh, and rings. Okay, let's talk about those. Rings are the most useful and at the same time the most useless mechanic within the Oracle games. Link will collect rings throughout his adventure, and when they're equipped, they have different effects, like boosting Link's stats or making encounters with Maple more frequent. Or it could be something as silly as transforming Link into an Octorok. There are 64 rings in total, each with very unique effects. And there are rings out there that make Link ridiculously powerful. But using rings can also get pretty tedious. You have to find the ring, get it appraised by this guy in town, who will then add it to your ring list. Then you have to go into the ring list and put the ring you want into the ring box. Then you go into the menu and then equip the ring from there. Yeah, you're gonna be doing a lot of menuing in this game, but I'll give this a pass because of the Game Boy Color. There are rings exclusive to each game, and some can only be attained by linking the two games. So even with Oracle of Seasons completed, you can come back to your save file whenever you've collected a password from Oracle of Ages to get a corresponding prize in Oracle of Seasons, which will then give you another secret you can take back to Ages for a reward in that game as well. You guys following this? With that in mind, I have my extremely complicated password here and a burning desire to close this chapter of my childhood by finishing the game I never got to buy. Let's get into The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Ages. Also, if you're enjoying this, let me know in the comments. So if you decided to play Oracle of Ages first, the cutscenes in this game will be slightly different, hinting at Twin Rova cooking up the grander scheme in the background. Having completed Seasons, I'll link my game using the password, and it took me 10 minutes to figure out that this should have been a club and not a spade. So now that I have a linked game, we're going to experience Link's journey in Labrina as part of a continued story, with Twin Rova already revealing themselves and going forward with their plot. And with the sacrifice of Onyx, they've lit the flame of destruction. There are 2 more flames to light before they resurrect the evil king. We then cut to Link, who has been teleported to the realm of Labrina by the Triforce. It's here that we meet Impa again. Can you believe she doesn't recognize Link? What's going on here? She tells Link she's in search of a singer named Nehru and needs someone marked by the Triforce to help her get past this ominous barrier. So Link clears the way and the pair can hear a woman singing in the distance. It's Nehru, surrounded by animals like a Disney princess, and for some reason only this bear decides to move out of the way for you, nobody else. We get this nice shot of a singing Nehru before Link and Impa introduce themselves. Nehru is accompanied by her childhood friend Ralph, and the two agree to join Link and Impa to head back to Hyrule for their safety. So it looks like mission accomplished? Impa? No, it can't be. You wouldn't betray us.
Yeah, boy.
Well, we learn that Impa is possessed by an evil sorceress named Varen.
Smash.
Which explains the short-term memory loss earlier. Varen reveals herself and intends to capture Nehru, the Oracle of Ages, but unlike Onyx, who just grabbed Din, Varen fully possesses Nehru's body and uses her powers of time to jump back into the distant past to start a new age of darkness. This affects Labrina in the present, causing people to cease to exist, turn to stone, and turn into old men? I'm still trying to figure out what happened to this guy. So a new journey begins for Link, with Impa once again sitting this one out. But she once again tells Link to meet up with the Maku tree in the main hub known as Lina City. How did the Maku tree get here? I guess we'll see. So Link heads to Lina City to meet with the Maku tree, and we discover that it's a female tree in this game instead. She tells Link that he must stop Varen from having her way with the timeline, but before she can offer more advice, she's affected by Varen's meddling in the past, completely disappearing from existence. It's clear that our hero needs a link to the past.
That guy got it.
Conveniently on the next screen, there's a warp portal left behind by Varen, allowing Link and Ralph to travel back 500 years to when Lina City was just Lina Village, ruled by Queen Ambi. And this queen is intent on building a giant tower originally meant to keep an eye out for her lost lover. It's not long before we discover Varen has influenced her to become a tyrant, forcing the queen's people to work on the tower non-stop, with the villagers now calling it the Black Tower. Link tracks down the Maku tree, a sapling in this time, and saves her from being jumped by Varen's minions. And with the tree saved, she agrees to repay Link when she grows up, and also insists that she'll be his bride? Wonder how that would work. So we go back to the present. The Maku tree does fulfill her end of the bargain and tells Link he must track down the 8 essences of time to gain the power to defeat Varen and save Nehru. So now the game opens up for Link to do the same thing again 8 times with 8 new dungeons to explore. Oracle of Ages was developed as the more puzzle-oriented game of the two, requiring Link to go back and forth between the past and the present to progress. After clearing the first dungeon, Link will obtain Nehru's Harp of Ages, which allows him to play songs that will open portals to the past and vice versa in specific areas of the map. It won't always be obvious as to when Link should time travel, especially if you're looking to gain access to certain rewards like the Pieces of Heart. This puzzle-based aspect leads to interesting situations, like the time Link washes up on Crescent Island while he's in the past. This reptilian race called Toke will rob Link blind, requiring him to find a way around the island to get back all of his gear from the various Toke scattered around. And replaying this part reminded me of the Eventide Island challenge in Breath of the Wild, where Link has absolutely no items to work with and just has to go into straight survival mode. There's a seed called Scent Seeds he'll need to use to trade for the rest of his items, but it comes from a tree that doesn't exist in the past. So Link will have to find a sapling to plant in the past and then jump to the present to collect seeds to bring back to the past to get the rest of his gear. And there's also puzzles reflected in both dungeons and the bosses that await you in there. This is just my opinion here, but the dungeons in this game are a vast improvement over the ones in Seasons. But that doesn't mean that this game doesn't have its stinkers. Two dungeons that stand out here to describe this contrast is Dungeon 6, Mermaid's Cave, and Dungeon 7, Jabu Jabu's Belly. Mermaid's Cave is practically two dungeons in one, a cave hidden behind a waterfall in the past. Link will have to brave this dungeon both in the past and the present to be fully able to clear it, requiring you to completely exit the dungeon, play the Harp of Ages to go forward in time, and then enter the dungeon once again. So in the present version of this dungeon, there's an item called Mermaid Suit, which allows Link to dive underwater and swim, which he'll need to take back to the past in order to defeat the boss at the end of the dungeon. Shitty swimming mechanics aside, this dungeon was one of the highlights of the game for me and cleverly incorporates this game's time mechanic. That next dungeon though. What if we took these shitty swimming mechanics and built a whole level based around that? That is Jabu Jabu's Belly, which I dub as the 2D version of the dreaded water temple from Ocarina of Time. Remember Lord Jabu Jabu from that game and all the fun you had exploring inside of him with Princess Ruto? Don't take that out of context. This dungeon is not like that. The whole dungeon is based around having to alter water levels on 3 different floors, having the player perform multiple passes through many of these rooms because you'll either need the room submerged in water to clear large gaps, or you need it devoid of water entirely to gain access to a switch or item. Not to mention to swim, you need to tap the directional pad in the direction you want to go multiple times. And I'm sure it controls this way so that you can use the A and B buttons to use items underwater, but seeing as I've been swimming faster by mashing A this whole time with the flippers, it's very easy to forget how this new suit controls. Rinse and repeat this water draining process multiple times and maybe you'll make it out alive, but this one was definitely a slog. Most of the bosses, on the other hand, are a breeze, each having some kind of gimmick you'll have to figure out to best them. Like this annoying spinning reject from the Thwomp family known as the Head Thwomp. You'll have to throw bombs into its open head top thing, timing your throw just right to land on the red face for it to take damage. Or what about Smog, a giant fart demon that splits itself into tiny clouds that you'll have to combine before you can damage him. These are all brand new bosses unique to Oracle of Ages, which makes it pretty clear that the team started development with an original Zelda title in mind, while Oracle of Seasons has a lot of leftovers from its original concept as a Legend of Zelda remake. With this in mind, I've noticed that Oracle of Ages has a tad more polish, and the overall plot is a bit more fleshed out. Not to mention the dungeons feel better designed. Which brings me back to our story of how this Lost Trilogy panned out. With the mystical Seat of Power revealed to the world in 1999 and this Triforce series being established, Flagship wanted to be able to link these 3 titles together and allow them to be picked up and played in any order. With such an ambitious project, the team had over 10 scenario writers working on 3 unique stories intending to be released 6 weeks apart from each other. So the next in line was Mystical Seed of Wisdom. This was the one that must have become Oracle of Ages, with the puzzles planned to be based around colors? Wait, that doesn't sound right. That's not what we got here. The box in the color scheme is blue, and in Zelda that means wisdom.
You need to say clearly what happened.
So Seed of Courage was going to have the theme of time, where you would need to utilize morning, noon, evening, and night in order to solve various riddles in the game. Okay, so that's not exactly what Oracle of Ages became, but this is very close to the mark. So that means our lost game out of the bunch is this title known as Mystical Seed of Wisdom. Kinda.
And what happened?
So here's what happened. With Seed of Power mostly developed, Flagship continued developing the other games, with Nehru being featured in Seed of Wisdom, and Furore slated to play a major role in Seed of Courage. So it's true that the Mystical Seed of Wisdom game would have had color-based puzzle mechanics, and according to IGN at that time, there would have been various events, areas, and tools built around certain colors, which sounds pretty fitting for the, Game Boy Color. There's further proof for this in 3 different concept sketches for Nehru, with her holding a paintbrush and a palette. Flagship was even looking to connect the trilogy of games through some cell phone adapter technology that would have allowed players to perform a data transfer. This idea would eventually change into the password system we see in the final product used to link the two games. And as the project went on, 3 games proved to be too much for the Game Boy Color to handle, and the team struggled to get the password system working across all 3 titles. So Flagship had to drastically scale things back. This resulted in one of the games being scrapped, which I'll say was Mystical Seed of Wisdom, since we lost the color-based system from that title. And based on the themes of being able to change the time of day in Mystical Seed of Courage, it looks like that was the game that became Oracle of Ages. But now that I think about it, if you look at the past setting in Oracle of Ages, there's a slight filter that makes it look like it's later in the day. So my speculation is instead of adding in several different hours of the day, they used the existing filters depicting evening to become Labrina in the past. As for Nehru, she got to stick around instead of Furore, and they ended up giving her the title Oracle of Ages. I'm sorry, Furore. Maybe someday they'll remake this trilogy for a modern console and you'll get your own game this time, fingers crossed. They already did it for Link's Awakening. As for Flagship, this wouldn't be their last run-in with the Zelda franchise, with them following up Oracle of Seasons and Ages with the Minish Cap for Nintendo's next handheld, the Game Boy Advance. And don't worry, we'll get to that game someday. So we return to Labrina, and before we get to this exciting conclusion of the tale, I have to talk about some of the cool things that carried over from my Oracle of Seasons playthrough. The world map this time is completely unique from Oracle of Seasons, with different NPCs and aesthetics depending on the time period Link is in. Many different races and characters from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask make an appearance in these games, like the Gorons and Zoras, inhabiting mountain and underwater environments respectively. If you ended up playing Ages first, Subrosians don't make an appearance during your playthrough, but in a linked game, it looks like they decided to vacation in Labrina. They're also returning characters like Maple, who serves the same purpose this time around. And wherever in his growth spurt Butts here left off, carries on into the linked game as well. Not to mention Link's deeds in Holodrum are referenced throughout. I have to give these titles props for making these worlds truly feel connected, especially once you get into a linked game. By taking the secret from this old lady, bringing it to another NPC in my Oracle of Seasons file, completing this minigame, and taking the secret at the end of the quest back into my Oracle of Ages file, I finally got my hands on the Master Sword after 22 years. This has been one hell of a journey for me, you guys don't understand. Anyway, back to our story. So, Link is going around collecting essences of time from the dungeons, and at one point is told by Impa that Zelda has arrived in Labrina, but was whisked away by Varin and Onyx's minion, Vyre. Vyre took her to some place in the Black Tower, so Link goes after her, and the biggest surprise for me in this game so far is that I got to play Donkey Kong in a Zelda game. Link saves Zelda, which leads to her and Impa deciding to lay low at Nehru's house. Please, I already have another damsel in distress to worry about. So once Link completes Dungeon 6, he and Ralph decide to go on a full-on assault of Queen Ambi's castle to corner Varin and save Nehru. Surprisingly, Link does end up fighting the possessed Nehru, and by knocking her out with mystery seeds, Varin is vulnerable. After a few hits, she's fully exorcised from Nehru's body, but she decides Queen Ambi would serve as a perfect backup host. Cornered by the Queen's guards, Link, Ralph, and Nehru retreat back to the present, and while Nehru is saved, everyone decides it's not the best idea to leave an evil sorceress to do as she pleases in the past. So with that in mind, Link must continue on to get 2 more essences. And if you feel like there's more plot this time around, it's because there is. It's almost night and day between this and Season. The Nehru kidnapping plot on top of Queen Ambi and the Black Tower, while Twin Rova keeps bragging about how Ganon is coming back, Zelda showing up, all while Link has to keep pushing through these dungeons to get the essences of time. This plot had me extremely invested by the time I got to this part. So Link obtains the 7th essence from Jabu Jabu's belly, and once again, fuck this dungeon. The Zoras seem to agree with me because they're so impressed by this feat. They reward Link with a Zora scale, making him an honorary Zora. This eventually leads to a run-in with this undead pirate crew we met in Holodrum after their ship got stuck in the desert. We find out they're originally from Labrina, but they're stuck again, this time in a stormy section of the seas known as the Sea of Storms. But with the help of the Zora scale we just got, the captain is able to calm the seas and escape. As a reward, he gives Link the Toke Eyeball, the item Link needs to access the final dungeon, the Ancient Tomb. Finally, after exploring this dungeon and defeating the most nuanced boss in the game, I found this one kind of fun, Link retrieves the final essence of time. It's time to use them to end Varin once and for all. So Link heads back to the Maku tree, who just like in Oracle of Seasons uses the essences of time to create her version of the huge Maku seed. A seed that gives Link the power to see the ultimate truth, Twin Rova stops by one more time to troll Link and tell him it's too late. They will soon light the flame of sorrow. But this doesn't deter Link from his mission. He heads to the Black Tower in the past to confront the possessed Queen Ambi. But before entering, we find out that Ralph is committed to make the hard choice to kill Queen Ambi to stop Varin in the process. So Link, why are you not telling him you found a way to exorcise her like you did with Nehru? To make this worse, Zelda tells Link that Ambi is Ralph's ancestor, and by killing her, Ralph would be erasing himself from existence. A sacrifice he's willing to make, but totally wouldn't need to if Link just spoke up. So Link enters the tower and uses the huge Maku seat, but we find out Twin Rova's threats were true. It's too late. Varin has spread enough sorrow to light the flame of sorrow, but Link must press on. And I will say, while it's still pretty short, the tower is much more fleshed out than Onyx's castle, and serves as somewhat of a mini dungeon before we finally take on Varin. Once at the top, we see Ralph trying to kill Ambi, while Link just stands there to watch this play out. I'm not kidding. Does Link low-key want Ralph erased from the timeline? Luckily, he gets instantly folded and lives to see another day, so now it's up to Link. And he fights the possessed Ambi, which requires you to do the same exact thing you did when you fought Nehru, and I find it odd that Varin would think that this would work. But like any final boss, she has multiple phases when she finally leaves Ambi's body and takes Link on one-on-one, or one-on-one with Shadow Link she summons. But finally, Varin is vanquished, and Link, Ralph, and Nehru decide to head back to the newly saved village. Varin isn't dead!
Oh shit!
And ambushes the team, revealing to Link her final form, this turtle.
What?
Or rather, she can shapeshift into several forms. But from a visual perspective, this doesn't feel as grandiose as Onyx's final dragon form, but I think out of the two, it's a much better fight, leaning slightly into that puzzle-based theme Oracle of Ages has going for it, where you have to figure out each form's weakness. But after a long and hard battle, Link finally defeats Varin, who tells Link her purpose has already been served. Sorrow was spread throughout Labrina, and the flame of sorrow has been lit. Ganon, the Dark King, will soon return. Despite this, Queen Ambi is finally able to go back to being a benevolent ruler, sending her thanks to Link, and with that, the timeline has been saved.
Wrong.
Impa, as usual, arrives with bad news. Twin Rova scooped up Zelda while she was helping out the people of Labrina, and in such a cop-out way, this one action causes the last flame, the Flame of Despair, to be lit. You can tell the Flame of Despair would have been the focus for the final game, but I suppose it had to get lit somehow. With Zelda in their possession, these old ladies plan to use her as a sacrifice to revive Ganon. But an Avengers-style crossover, Din somehow appears in the past to come to Link's aid, and alongside Nehru, they use their Oracle powers to send Link directly to Twin Rova's lair. It's time for the final battle. After all the shit talk between the two games, Link finally takes on these witches, having to bounce their incoming spells to the opposite twin to properly damage them. This was pretty annoying, but once you do enough damage, they combine together just like in Ocarina of Time. And this battle can be quite the gauntlet, so hopefully you gathered a ton of heart containers during your adventure. Also, I will not fall like Varin and Nox. Who's Nox? It seems like the twins were on a nickname basis with Onyx because they just call him this twice in the epilogue. Anyway, in their fused form, they'll switch between fire and ice forms, and not only will Link have to strike them while dodging their attacks with fire or ice plastered all over the terrain, you'll also have to shoot them with a mystery seed once they're vulnerable. A step that I'm not sure how you're expected to know. I'm sure there's probably a clue somewhere, but I ended up using a guide by this point. And finally, these hags are defeated, and with their final breath, they choose to become the sacrifice for Ganon. There's no stopping it now. The Dark King has returned, more bloodthirsty and angry than ever. Personally, I found this fight to be easier than Twin Rova because you'll just be striking Ganon with your sword until he goes down, but he hits like a fucking truck, so plan accordingly. There's even this phase where he teleports you to some mirror dimension and all your movement controls are reversed, so good luck dodging here. I will admit, for the sake of time, I was using the rewind function on the Switch to avoid having to start this battle again and again.
You were just making it look like you were playing. You're a phony!
But after enough hits, it's finally over. Ganon has been defeated once again. We go to retrieve Princess Zelda. She reveals since the ritual wasn't fully completed and Twin Rova made the sacrifice instead, Ganon was incomplete and revived as a mindless, angry version of himself instead. The altar begins to crumble, but with the help of our Oracle friends Din and Nehru, they get Link and Zelda to safety. Finally, the world is at peace, and this crazy adventure is complete. We get the end credits showing Labrina and Holodrum at peace, while Link takes some time to hang out one last time with Ricky, Moosh, and Dimitri. Princess Zelda returns to Hyrule, and in this last shot, we see Link boarding a ship and waving goodbye to all of his new friends. And now that I look back on this, between the two games, this can be between a 30 to 40 hour experience, and seeing this end screen was so cathartic for me. It's like I put this game down for 20 plus years and finally closed out this chapter of my life. Good thing it's over? Hero secret and a password? Yeah, I'm not doing that. To truly 100% complete this game, you'd use this hero secret to start a brand new playthrough in Oracle of Ages, which begins a heroes game. And this allows you to see all the events you would have missed due to it being a linked game. So essentially it's New Game Plus, because you can start with more hearts and you can transfer your rings over from your previous playthroughs. Beat Oracle of Ages and you'll get another password called the Holodrum Secret, which would allow you to experience Oracle of Seasons as a linked game, this time to see how the climax to the story would have played out in Holodrum instead. We're not doing all of that for this video, but after doing some research, there are a couple of plot points that are closed out in an Oracle of Seasons linked game that are worth mentioning. For example, that undead pirate crew we encountered in both games. We know they've been either stuck in the desert or in the Sea of Storms for some time. Link your game to Oracle of Seasons and you'll discover that the captain of this crew is actually Queen Ambi's long-lost lover. You'll find Ambi in the desert in present day, sent there by Nehru at her request, and she encounters the captain, who tells her the seas still call him. And despite time traveling and braving this desert, Ambi says she understands and promises that she'll await his return. Did Nehru not just fuck up the timeline by doing this? Assuming these two never met ever again, you would assume Ambi found love elsewhere because of Ralph's whole existence. So with Nehru doing this, Ambi says she'll wait for this undead guy in the present, and chances are they can't have kids with him like this. And even if they did, they would be born in the present. So Nehru just wrote Ralph's existence out of this timeline. And I know I also made jokes about Impa being useless, disguising herself as a cook in Din's troop here, but if you play Oracle of Seasons as a linked game, we discover that the entire troop are undercover Hyrulean knights, presumably all in disguise to escort Din to Hyrule. This doesn't matter as much since they failed anyway, but it's good to get closure on that plot point as well. As for Link, let's talk about Link. The game ends with him hopping aboard a ship to head back to Hyrule, and there are two theories about this Link in particular. The first is that this is the same Link from A Link to the Past, who already defeated Ganon, which leads to the events of the Oracle games with Twin Rova trying to revive him. The Hyrule Historia Collector's book published back in 2011 agrees with this theory, placing Oracle of Ages and Seasons directly after A Link to the Past on the timeline. So why is this ending important then? Because you could directly correlate Link leaving on a ship, leading directly into the intro to Link's Awakening, where he wrecks in a storm and ends up on Koholint Island, which puts Link's Awakening after the events of this game. Spoilers for Link's Awakening, but we find out the entire setting for this game takes place within the dreams and nightmares of a being called the Windfish, which seems to draw heavily from Link's memories as well. So many fans believe there's a plot reason for some of these reused enemies and assets from Link's Awakening in the Oracle games. Like Facade in particular, what if plot-wise, Link's memories of facing Facade in the Oracle games is what influenced the boss Facade Link faces in Link's Awakening? We see the nightmares on Koholint shapeshift into Aghanim and Ganon to fight off Link, so the same could go for Facade here. There's also the NPCs Malon and Talon in Oracle of Seasons, characters from Ocarina of Time that were inspired by Link's Awakening's Marien and Tarien. But plot-wise, what if Marien and Tarien are dream versions based on Malon and Talon based on his memories of them from the Oracle games? The one reason I could find that debunks the idea that Oracle comes before Link's Awakening is that Zelda seems to not know who Link is when they run into each other in the game. We know they met in A Link to the Past, so what gives here? Which brings me to the other theory, and as of right now, the confirmed timeline. This game takes place after A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. The revised timeline in the more recent Zelda Encyclopedia acknowledges this, with this Link still being the same Link from A Link to the Past, and the Ganon we see Twin Rova attempting to revive is the one who was defeated in A Link to the Past. I'm not a fan of this version of events as much because these games seem to fit right in between A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. And if this encyclopedia acknowledges this is the same Link from A Link to the Past, then the whole reason the first theory was changed or debunked is a moot point because Zelda still speaks as if she's never met Link before. Therefore, there's no reason these games can occur between Link's Awakening and A Link to the Past. But it also says here that his fate is that he sets sail for training. The Japanese version of this encyclopedia doesn't bother to even acknowledge which Link this is, which led many to believe that this is a different Link in Zelda altogether, which furthers my point that Nintendo does not care about this timeline. Discuss in the comments. It's the year 2000 and Nintendo is preparing some massive announcements at their annual trade show, Nintendo Space World. The first reveal, their next big home console, the Nintendo GameCube. The other announcement, the Game Boy Advance. With these new consoles came the latest entries to classic Nintendo franchises like Super Mario, Metroid, and of course, The Legend of Zelda. Fans eagerly awaited the next big follow-up to the highly popular 3D Zelda titles Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. So Shigeru Miyamoto himself would introduce a demo for the future of the Zelda franchise.
Oh my god.
IGN at this time described this trailer as, quote, absolutely everything we could have hoped for in a GameCube Zelda title, end quote, lauding Link's character model for its flowing hair and expressive features. The crowd at the event cheered, and I'm sure there were tears of nerdy joy flowing from the eyes of that audience. The next evolution of Zelda was on its way.
Many months later.
So Zelda fans may adore the Wind Waker now, but back in this time, this is one of the most controversial decisions that Nintendo has made for this franchise, like ever. Even Miyamoto was a little on the fence about this new cartoony cel-shaded version of Link. So let's do some digging to uncover how this change occurred and discuss the major title featuring this design. But first, let's start with its debut game, The Legend of Zelda: The Four Swords.
Wait, Mentok, what do you mean? What about the Wind Waker? How could you?
Okay, so we'll save the Four Swords games for a follow-up video, but it's true that Four Swords is technically the debut game for Toon Link. On December 2nd, 2002, Nintendo, in collaboration with Capcom, released The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Four Swords in North America for the Game Boy Advance. A significant chunk of this game was a modified port of A Link to the Past, which I have a video on for your binging pleasure. But the other part, Four Swords, was a strictly multiplayer game with a brand new story featuring Toon Link for the first time. While the Wind Waker is already in development and influenced the art direction for Four Swords, the latter marked the debut of this art style for Link. Interestingly enough, Japanese audiences wouldn't get Four Swords until March 2003, but received the Wind Waker in December 2002, while US audiences had to wait until March 2003 for the Wind Waker. Even with these dates in mind, Four Swords came first, but we'll save that discussion for a dedicated Four Swords video. Now, let's dive into the gorgeous world of the Wind Waker. Our story begins with the legend of a Hyrule long past. An evil man spread chaos through the land with the power of the Triforce, but a young hero dressed in a green tunic stepped up to oppose him and managed to seal him away, bringing peace to the land. This hero would be known as the Hero of Time, and became a legend across generations. But one day that sealed evil broke out and brought terror to the land again, and this time, a hero didn't appear. The situation is dire, so the kingdom could only do one thing: pray to the gods for help. Many years have passed, and no one knows the fate of this mysterious land of Hyrule, but its story persists, with one island named Outset Island starting a tradition of giving a green tunic to young boys who come of age. And that's where we meet our hero, Link. But before we officially see how he plays into this tale, this whole opening story is meant to recap the events of Ocarina of Time. And since Princess Zelda sent that Link back in time to live out the rest of his childhood after they sealed away Ganon, the spirit of the hero is completely missing from this particular timeline. No hero incarnations or reincarnations to save the day, hence that dire situation at the end of the legend. So Hyrule as we know it is all but lost, which brings us back to our new Link. It's time for his coming of age, which means he gets his own green tunic in honor of the Hero of Time. On this island, Link lives alongside his grandmother and younger sister Errol, who permits him to use her telescope as a coming of age gift. And that's when Link spots trouble. A giant bird known as the Helmarok King is flying over the island with a girl trapped in his talons. But a nearby pirate ship fires a well-placed cannonball, saving the girl from its clutches. Link discovers her name is Tetra, captain of the same set of pirates. But introductions are short because the Helmarok King does another pass on the island and grabs Errol instead, whisking her off to the foreboding Forsaken Fortress. So in hopes to find his sister, it's time for Link to temporarily become a pirate and join Tetra's crew on a rescue mission. As they approach the fortress, it's time to quietly get inside. great plan. This is where the player will get their feet wet, as Link has to brave the depths of the fortress in an attempt to get to his sister. But once he finds her, their reunion is pretty brief. Helmarok King grabs Link and shows him off to his master, and I wonder who this could be. It's obviously Ganondorf, but more on him later. By his command, the bird throws Link to his death in the ocean, but Link is made of steel apparently, and survives this fall. He's rescued by none other than a talking boat, who calls himself the King of Red Lions. So Boat here explains to Link that somehow Ganondorf, the breaker of seals, broke a seal placed on him by the gods, and now he once again seeks to cause mayhem on the land. And the only way to stop him? Using the power of the legendary Master Sword, a sword that can only be accessed by overcoming trials. So I'm sure you all see where this is going. So Link must go on a journey to find 3 goddess pearls to prove himself worthy of wielding the Master Sword. But first, our boat friend here gifts Link with a powerful artifact used to control the winds, the Wind Waker. Hey, that's the name of the game! And with that, the mission is set. The world opens up for the player to explore, with the King of Red Lions joining Link as his mode of transportation. The player will discover pretty quickly that a majority of this world consists of a great sea, and with the freedom to sail wherever he pleases, Link will jump from island to island in search of the goddess pearls. And the first stop is Dragon Roost Island, where the Rito tribe resides, a bird-like species who doubles as the world's post officers since they just fly everywhere instead. If you're familiar with the Zelda series, a fun fact about this tribe is that they evolved from the Zora species that were prominent in Hyrule during Ocarina of Time. A species known for being aquatic are now rocking beaks and feathers. So on Dragon Roost Island, Link goes around helping the Rito tribe with their local problems, the main one being their sky spirit Valoo being out of control on top of a nearby mountain. And since this young Rito named Prince Kamali is holding on to Din's Pearl, the goddess pearl Link needs, it's time to do a favor for a favor. So with the help of another Rito named Medley, Link scales the mountain to figure out what's going on. And of course, there's more to this story. A giant spider named Goma is behind everything. And behind everything, I mean Valoo. Like he's literally underneath him biting his butt all day. That's what's happening here. But not to worry, Link murders it and this makes Valoo chill out. And just as planned, Prince Komali relinquishes his goddess pearl in exchange. So that's 1 pearl down, 2 to go. This adventure is gonna be a breeze.
No, it's not.
The next stop for Link and Boat is Forest Haven, where he'll meet the Koroks and the Great Deku Tree. If this dynamic seems somewhat familiar to you, yes, this is another callback to Ocarina of Time, with the Koroks being the evolution of the Kokiri tribe of the forest, their home being where the hero of time grew up. Personally, I think they got the evolutionary short end of the stick here. But Link is in luck, because the Great Deku Tree and the Koroks are ready to just hand over Ferori's pearl. But as Zelda games have taught us, it's not that easy. A Korok named Makar is lost in the Forbidden Woods, a dangerous island covered with monsters. Sounds exactly like the place we want to go. Another favor for a favor. So Link jumps in to rescue Makar from the island, where he squares off with the next major boss.
Wait till you see the...
Kale Demos? Kale Demos. Pick your favorite pronunciation. But by defeating this boss, Link rescues Makar. And with their problem solved, the Great Deku Tree and the Koroks reward Link with Ferori's Pearl. So that's 2 pearls down, 1 to go. We're almost there. The final pearl, Nehru's Pearl, is located on Great Fish Isle, where Link must obtain it from the water spirit Jabun. Yet another callback to Ocarina of Time, where it's theorized that Jabun is a descendant of Lord Jabu Jabu, the giant whale creature that the hero of time hopped inside of to find Princess Ruto of the Zora that one time. So in their search for Jabun, Link and the King of Red Lions find the island to be ransacked, and Jabun is missing. It turns out he's hiding in a cave near Outset Island in an attempt to stay safe from Ganondorf. After going on a bit of a side mission, aka stealing bombs from Tetra's pirate crew, Link manages to blow up the entrance blocking entry into Jabun's hideaway, and speaks to the water spirit, who agrees to give him Nehru's Pearl. Okay, so surely after all of this, Link is worthy of wielding this Master Sword, right?
No, it's not.
Link has to place the pearls in their rightful locations at the Triangle Islands, which reveals the Tower of the Gods, which rises from the Great Sea. Then he has to get to the top of this tower, defeat Godon, the guardian of the tower, which must mean he's now worthy of the sword, right? Okay, so defeating Godon then gives Link roof access to the tower, but unfortunately there's no party up here. It's a giant bell that he has to ring, which reveals a portal in the ocean near the tower. And finally, when he heads to the portal, Link and the King of Red Lions go beneath the waves to a castle that's suspended in time. Is this Hyrule? More on that later. But here within this castle, Link finally discovers the one and only Master Sword. And in this satisfying cutscene, he removes it from its pedestal. So after doing this, time begins to flow in Hyrule once again, but no time to worry about that now. We have to go vanquish Ganon and become a self-made hero. But let's pause here for a second. I got so caught up in this story, I didn't even mention how this Link came to be in the first place. We have to rewind back to the year 2000. Production on GameCube titles were ramping up, and for the next big Zelda title, Eiji Aonuma would step up to direct. You may know him now for being the head producer for the Zelda franchise. So after his work on Majora's Mask, early concepts began for the next title following up on the foundation established by Ocarina of Time, with veteran producers and creators of the series Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka jumping in as the producers. So in this extremely early phase, there wasn't much of a game to even present at Space World 2000, so Aonuma and the team quickly put together the clip of Link in Ganondorf to build up hype for the GameCube reveal. And while this completely wowed the fans, Aonuma disliked it. Even though it had enhanced graphics, he found the style to be too samey to past Zelda games. It was difficult for us to imagine ourselves easily coming up with new ideas and expanding on that world if we've chosen that path. Of course, while a game is more than its visuals, it's going to be made mostly by the same people, and the ideas we had within the same team had its limits. So he and the team explored other options. Enter designers Yoshiki Haruhana and Satoru Takizawa. First, Haruhana conceptualized a more cartoonish version of a younger Link that turned heads within the team, with Takizawa thinking, quote, "The instant I saw that drawing, my designer spirit came to life, and I thought, with a character like that, we can give him actions that will look and feel good no matter how he moves." With this in mind, Takizawa sketched Moblin designs in a similar style. The two designs gave the team an aha moment, and they decided to push forward with a more cartoon aesthetic for their new title, building on a cel-shaded technique to achieve this for 3D models. And so, Toon Link was born. Cel shading is a technique that uses a shading algorithm on 3D models to make it look more flat and cartoony. And we see this technique all the time in the current gaming era, more frequently with games based on anime to preserve the look of 2D animation in some form. But in the year 2000 for gaming, this technique was pretty new. Fear Effect, released in February 2000 for the PlayStation, would be one of the earliest examples of cel shading being applied to 3D models. These models were put against pre-rendered backgrounds, so not fully cel-shaded, but I'd argue this game visually was way ahead of its time, especially having pulled this off on the PlayStation. But it was Jet Set Radio, released in June 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast, that truly pioneered how far this technique could go in video games. To this day, Jet Set Radio's aesthetic is wildly praised and opened the floodgates for more games using this technique in the 6th generation of consoles. I'm not saying Sega directly influenced Aonuma's team or their direction to go with cel-shaded graphics, but visually this style was definitely starting to become more popular. And this would show in games that followed shortly after, like Okami and Beautiful Joe. So with Aonuma and the rest of the Zelda team going full force with the cartoon style, they used a custom engine for their new title, as well as one of the most popular 3D tools at the time, Maya. And to further complement the cartoonish visuals, they decided the game would take place among islands in a large ocean, and it wouldn't be long before sailing would be established as a major mechanic in-game. With development proceeding quickly, it was time for Aonuma to present the new project to Miyamoto and Tezuka, and after seeing the drastic change in graphical style, it's an understatement to say that they had concerns. One of these concerns was asking the team to supply a reason for Link's eyes being so big. Their answer? Having laser beams come out of them. While I think this was meant to be more of a playful idea, Link's expressive design is not just for show. If the player stands still, Link's eyes will shift around looking in the directions of secrets, items, or the path to progress, giving the player a subtle hint of what to do next. Despite the team's enthusiasm for their new Zelda title, Miyamoto continued to question Aonuma on whether this was the best route. However, seeing the team's excitement and commitment, Miyamoto eventually supported the decision. And as Space World 2001 approached, it was time to showcase the new direction to the fans. The reaction was mixed, with many fans feeling torn about the cartoonish look of their beloved franchise. Much like Miyamoto, this new direction took time for the fans to get used to. They were divided on the new look, with many believing that the dark, mature vibe initially seen the year before was lost and replaced with a game for kids. Keep in mind, 2001 was a time where grittier games were on the rise, alongside this bump in graphical power, like Halo Combat Evolved, Grand Theft Auto 3, Metal Gear Solid 2, Final Fantasy X, Devil May Cry, and Silent Hill 2. Even Sonic Adventure 2 at that time went with a darker plot, introducing Shadow and his tragic backstory. So you can imagine the type of fans this decision to go with a cartoony style for Zelda may have upset. Even Miyamoto, who initially wasn't on board with the drastic change, was surprised by some of the backlash and made a decision to cut back on revealing new information about the title until there was a playable demo that could land in the hands of fans, in hope that gameplay would change their minds. And he was right. When they brought the title back to E3 2002 the following year, journalists praised the gameplay and how well it flowed with the new graphical style. Though, as I'm sure you all know, fans of certain franchises can be fickle. So the discourse continued, resorting to dubbing the game Zelda derogatorily. I wonder if anyone watching right now is like one of those skeptical fans from back in the day. If you are, leave a comment. I'm not going to trash you or anything. I'm just curious to know what you thought in that moment in time. At the time, we couldn't really directly see the response online the way we can now. There was already a division between those who liked that artistic style and who didn't. And I had the impression after release that we hadn't quite gotten across that barrier in order to deliver the Zelda game that we wanted. That was just my own vague idea after talking to a number of people." End quote. By October 2002, the title was finally given a name in Japan, Kaze no Takuto, or Wind Baton, which would be localized to the Wind Waker in the West to draw attention to the importance of wind within the game. The gameplay for movement and combat remains relatively the same, with Link getting access to a sword and shield pretty early on in the game. The usual gameplay loop of Link meeting unique characters with colorful personalities and helping them with their troubles for rewards in exchange is still a major part of the game as well. There are 7 major dungeons Link will explore to achieve his goal of taking down Ganon, and along the way he'll discover equipment that veteran Zelda players will recognize, like bombs, the hookshot, the boomerang, etc. Even the Wind Waker mechanics themselves, while a bit more, shall I say, complex, are heavily based on the Ocarina of Time from the previous titles, with Link being able to play 6 different songs that affect the world around him, allowing Link to change the direction of the wind or the time of day, or even warp across the map. But what truly sets this game apart from the Zelda games that came before is the sailing. If you played this game, this was pretty groundbreaking, and I'm sure this is probably one of the main things you remember about it. Link utilizes a sail attached to the King of Red Lions and must utilize the direction of the wind to control their speed, which means using the Wind Waker to alter the wind's flow is going to be crucial and something the player does frequently. This is the sight you're going to be seeing a majority of the time in the Wind Waker. And while I have no qualms with the sailing mechanic or the majesty of this cell-shaded ocean and the wind and waves subtly breathing life into this environment, it can get very tedious. The Great Sea contains 49 unique islands of different sizes. This includes the islands with towns, dungeons, and uninhabited ones, which really makes this, I believe, one of the most unique worlds in the Zelda franchise. There's just a lot of water here, and you're going to be navigating the sea very often.
No shit.
Sometimes this can be a vibe, just a very therapeutic piece of gaming as the two sail the Great Sea together. Maybe you don't use the map and just pick a direction and head there to see what awaits on those mysterious islands in the distance. Or maybe you just want to power through the game and want to do as little sailing as possible. Either way, there's no avoiding it. You're going to have to be sailing a lot. And that's not to say nothing happens on the Great Sea. You may find treasure that can be pulled up to your boat using the grappling hook. Or you may stumble upon an enemy base that has goodies awaiting inside once you murder every last one of them. The choice is yours. Link will also obtain these treasure maps throughout the game, which he'll have to use to navigate to collect items that are buried under this vast sea. All of these brand new elements that we see blossom within the Wind Waker, I think served as an important rubric for further evolving the open world design in future Zelda titles, especially comparing it to Breath of the Wild. For instance, the sailing feature opens up a non-linear world for Link, allowing him to tackle objectives in any order, or interacting with the environment using the Wind Waker to influence the wind's direction, or just the overall emphasis of discovery and exploration. These are elements that are the cornerstone of current 3D Zelda titles, and I can only long for Nintendo to take another pass at the Great Sea, using what they know now to fill it with a ton of new and interesting islands with towns, mini dungeons, and treasure to make sailing even more rewarding. But I digress. Before we go check up on Link, there was one other interesting addition to this game that I don't hear many people in the wild reminisce about, and that's the Tingle Tuner. Our other favorite Zelda character in green makes a return in the Wind Waker, and it has me thinking that maybe he deserves his own video, because I can't remember if I even brought him up in the Majora's Mask and Oracle of Ages videos. Link will stumble upon Tingle on Windfall Island, in jail no less. He's being detained under the accusation that he stole an item called a Picto Box, or this game's version of the camera. So if Link helps Tingle bust out, Tingle will reward him with the Tingle Tuner, an item that allows the player to take their Wind Waker experience onto their Game Boy Advance. Yes, the Tingle Tuner was Nintendo's way of capitalizing the Link feature between the GameCube and Game Boy Advance. So to access this feature, you would have to plug the Game Boy Advance into the controller socket for the GameCube and then activate the Tingle Tuner, which will allow Link to summon Tingle. And this was intended to support two-player cooperative play, so while one player explored the world of Wind Waker, another player would use the Game Boy Advance to provide support. The Game Boy screen displayed its own version of the map, with Tingle serving as a guide. And not only can Tingle give additional insights to Link's location or uncover secrets not seen on the main screen, Tingle also had a shop stocked with special items that could be purchased using rupees. And then these items could be used to assist Link, like the Tingle Bomb, special bombs used to reveal treasure on the GBA screen. You can also buy Tings, Tingle's brand of soda that can be used to restore different gauges for Link. So Tingle has amazing flavors here like red Ting, green Ting, and blue Ting to quench Link's thirst after being on the sea for so long. Being of Jamaican heritage, I appreciate this naming convention, and also shout out to the real Ting out there, which is an actual soda. It's phenomenal. Tangent aside, I guess Nintendo found Tingle to be so popular in Japan, he got 3 of his own spin-off titles, so let me know if I should even go down that rabbit hole at some point. Anyway, let's head back to the story and see how Link is doing. Oh good, he's ready to face Ganondorf once again with his brand new Master Sword in his possession. Despite defeating the Helmarok King and working together with Tetra's crew to save Errol, Ganondorf wipes the floor with Link. The Master Sword is not enough, and by retrieving the sword, Link also unsealed the rest of Ganondorf's power. Tetra attempts to help but is mollywopped too, but plot twist! By being so close to Ganondorf, he identifies Tetra as Princess Zelda. Unbeknownst to her, of course, and the necklace she's had this whole time was a piece of the Triforce of Wisdom all along. Luckily, before Ganon can do any more damage, Prince Komali and Valoo come to the rescue, getting them out of dodge before attempting to incinerate Ganon in his tower. As everyone escapes to Hyrule, the King of Red Lions finally reveals the truth to Link and Tetra. He is the last king of the Lost Kingdom of Hyrule, and in this cutscene, we finally learn the truth. Apparently, after no hero popped up to save the day when Ganon returned all those years ago, they prayed to the goddesses, who decided to just flood the whole place and start over. They did warn the good people of the land to retreat to the mountaintops, which, after their flood, became the islands that Link has been traveling to this whole time. The king, Daphnis Nohansen Hyrule, stayed behind with his kingdom, holding on to one piece of the Triforce of Wisdom while his daughter, the Princess Zelda of his time, went on to live her life in the New World after the flood. Tetra is a descendant of that Zelda who passed along her piece of the Triforce for generations. With the fragments finally reunited and all the truths revealed, the Master Sword needs to be reawakened to stop Ganon. To do so, sages are needed to keep the Master Sword's power flowing, but unfortunately, Ganon murdered 2 of them. So first order of business for Link, find some new ones. Fortunately for him, he has friends that are able to take up the mantle, with Makar awakening as the new Sage of Wind, and Medli awakening as the new Sage of Earth. This allows them to restore the Master Sword to its former glory, but this alone wasn't enough. That brings us to Link's second order of business, restore the Triforce of Courage, the shattered fragment of the Triforce left behind by the Hero of Time so long ago. This is the part of the game that requires you to be a little bit more adventurous. You'll need these special maps located across the Great Sea called Triforce charts that can be deciphered by Tingle at a cost to reveal the location of the Triforce shard. There are a total of 8 Triforce charts in all, and the game encourages you to start looking for these shards before you get to this moment, pushing you to start exploring islands on the Great Sea, so this quest may not be too tedious if you're going off the beaten path during your journey. If you haven't been doing that whatsoever and waited until the end game, then it's time to strap in and get to sailing. Oh, and if you want Tingle to decipher all these charts for you, it's gonna come up to a whopping 3,184 rupees, so I hope you've been saving up. For those of you who've played this game, how many of you waited till the last minute to collect these shards? I'm just curious. Interestingly enough, this portion of the game wasn't the original vision the devs had in mind leading up to the final battle with Ganondorf. There were 2 dungeons that were initially planned but had to be cut due to time constraints, and instead, they scattered Triforce pieces around the Great Sea to compensate. Most speculate that one of these dungeons was meant for obtaining Nehru's Pearl from Jabun, who just hands it to you once you meet him despite having to clear dungeons and beat bosses to obtain the other 2. Also, only 2 sages were required to restore the Master Sword. I mean, in the past there's always been like 7 sages, so it's clear that maybe at least 1 more may have been missing here. But my first thought after hearing all this is, why not include those dungeons in the Wind Waker HD remake for the Wii U released back in 2013? Which is 11 years old now, Jesus Christ. Turns out those cut dungeons ended up being used in future titles, though it hasn't been specifically revealed which ones. It's probably a no-brainer to say Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, but maybe Aonuma will release more details on this in the future. There's safe speculation that the underwater Hyrule was meant to be its own separate world that Link would be able to explore in the later half of the game, with this concept art showing a potential mechanic of Link tugging on a fish hook from beneath the water to have someone yank him up from the lower world back to the surface. Not only that, the concept art published in the Hyrule Historia reference book shows that they dabbled in the idea of Link aging throughout the game, which highly suggests an older Link would have been featured in the second half of the story, similarly to Ocarina of Time. Personally, I love the idea of them experimenting with this in a future Zelda game where the adventure is so vast that the years just gradually start piling on Link and he progressively gets older with time. But we return to our story, and Link collects all of the shards and restores the Triforce of Courage. After all the trials and busy work he's gone through, it's time to get validation from the gods. So he takes the Triforce back to the Tower of the Gods where they acknowledge him as a new hero. Finally, someone to fill the shoes of the Hero of Time. And with that, Toon Link here is dubbed the Hero of Winds. So proud of you, man. But before they can celebrate with Tetra Zelda down in Hyrule, they discover she's been kidnapped by Ganondorf and taken to his tower. Some old habits die hard, I guess. But Link is over this adventure by now, so he scales the tower to finish off Ganondorf once and for all. The Link squares off with a puppet version of Ganondorf, but at this point, Ganon has also had enough, and by using Link and Zelda, he recreates the full Triforce using their pieces, and it's too late. He makes a wish for Hyrule to resurface so he can take it for himself once and for all. At this point in the game, it's almost sad to see him so stuck in the past trying to relive his glory days. Ganon is like that one friend that sticks around a house party once it's done and doesn't know when to leave.
Julian!
Anyway, the Triforce decides to ignore Ganondorf's wish because the king snuck up and touched the Triforce before Ganon did, making his wish first for a pair of women's underwear. Wrong story. His actual wish is to bury himself and Ganondorf beneath the waves of the Great Sea, putting an end to old relics of a time long past. The Triforce grants this wish and begins to flood Hyrule again, but Ganondorf cannot let go and tries to kill off Link, which leads to a final battle. Once victorious, Link ends this in the coldest way possible, by lodging the Master Sword straight through Ganondorf's forehead. It's finally over. With one last goodbye to the old king of Hyrule, Link and Zelda return to the surface and become pirates. And together they head off on an adventure to find a new land to explore. The end. Or is it? We'll talk about those some other time. But there's one more feature the player can access once this game is complete. Second quest. You get to play the whole game again in Link's pajamas. On release, The Wind Waker received glowing reviews, with the game currently sitting at a 96 out of 100 on Metacritic. Many critics thoroughly enjoyed the game's visuals, comparing it to playing a cartoon, and even pushed back against the backlash from fans. It'd be nominated for several Game of the Year awards, praised for its storytelling, music, and design. And ultimately, The Wind Waker was a commercial success, pushing around 4.6 billion copies worldwide, making it the fourth best-selling GameCube game of all time. Despite what seems like an impressive number, this was disappointing for Nintendo. In comparison, Ocarina of Time had sold 7.6 million copies, so when they looked at the slow sales for The Wind Waker, they attributed this to the North American audience wanting something more realistic. This would lead to the development of the darker, more mature Twilight Princess. As for Japanese audiences, The Wind Waker was more warmly received, but at this time, there was an overall decline in the video game market, so that was yet another challenge Nintendo had to face. But the good news here is that eventually the Zelda community came around to respect The Wind Waker, as it's now looked back on as one of the most creative and charming titles in the franchise. And because of its cel-shaded approach, it's aged pretty well. I mentioned the HD remake for the Wii U released in 2013, which, if you think about it, more time has passed between the release of the remake and present day than the time between the original release and the HD remake. I feel old. But this remake is a gorgeous revamping of Wind Waker, which includes widescreen support, improved lighting, and this selfie mode on the Pictobox item that opened the door to some hilarious screenshots. The audio was given a facelift as well, using higher quality instruments, and the interface as a whole was updated to make frequently used items like the Wind Waker more accessible to players. The remake also added an item known as the Swift Sail, which would allow Link to sail even faster due to the higher technical power of the Wii U. The quest for the Triforce shards was significantly trimmed down in this version as well. Now the player can find 5 of the 8 shards without having to decipher Triforce charts, which also puts less strain on Link's wallet. But without the Game Boy Advance support, the Tingle Tuner was changed to the Tingle Bottle, an item that allowed players to send messages to other players of the game through Miiverse, Nintendo's social network for the Wii U, which I miss terribly. The players could leave messages and screenshots within the bottle and then toss it into the ocean to be collected by another player. But since the Miiverse has been discontinued, this item is now useless if you have this version of the game. But that's not even everything. There are quite a few other quality of life changes that I think could take up a whole video in itself. But just know this wasn't a cash grab remaster. Let me know in the comments which version you guys played first. But I know there are purists out there who always recommend playing the original version of games like these on the original console, but there are so many quality of life and graphical changes to the remake that I think it's worth your time to hunt down a copy and try it out. So if you're one of the people that held on to your Wii U like me, look at all that dust on it, you can scoop up this game for a pretty low cost of $112. Nintendo, please re-release this game. So you made it to the end of the video. If you're seeing this, leave Bring Back Tingle's Bottle in the comments section and I'll pin the first one to do so. And thank you for watching, truly. I'm going through a small rough patch right now as I lost my father last week. I'm not going to go into too much personal details, but his inspiration surrounds this channel. He was also quite the media personality, and all the things that he had me do as a kid got me to this point, and I figure I would just share that with you all. And as I continue to process this, I will be back soon with new, fresh content for all of you. So thanks again for sticking with me through this special compilation. Until next time.